Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Well, look at the Euros so far. We've got through up to Group E, have started. Obviously, Group F is the group of death, in my opinion. Lot to discuss. Obviously, I didn't do match reviews on the first few days of the tournament. Uh, had a busy weekend. Got jabbed, so I missed the England game as well. I had my partner down for the weekend, so I couldn't really have the time to review the first batch of games. And I did say I would cover them. I'm going to start with Italy Turkey quickly. I thought the Italians, they are the class of the tournament so far. Turkey were very, very disappointing. Italy were full value for their 3 goals, should have had more. Wales, Switzerland, that was an interesting game because I think the Swiss could have won that much by a canter. And Wales, I think, were lucky to get the point. Again, with these third place teams going through, like the 4 best third place teams going through on differential, it's going to prove very interesting. I can see a lot of teams just going for it. I can see less cagey group matches because goal difference is going to prove crucial. But Wales were very, very disappointing. Gareth Bale really disappointed. This is, his farewell tour pretty much, with speculation about his ongoing Real Madrid contract and whether he's going to retire and take an early payout. So that was really interesting. The Denmark-Finland game, obviously the Christian Eriksen situation. Um, Thankfully, he is recovering in hospital. And there's been a lot of criticism about the TV coverage of the incident and all that. Remember, UEFA have the TV rights. They sell those rights to the host broadcasters across Europe who are broadcasting all the matches. A lot of criticism has been thrown at the BBC here in the UK. A lot of criticism has also been thrown to the various broadcasters around Europe and the world for their coverage of that incident. But the outpouring of support from players, fans, coaches, the media towards Christian Eriksen has been very, very nice to see. It'll be interesting to see if he actually does play again. Under Italian law, if you have suffered a cardiac arrest or have any heart problems, you cannot play professional sport. So whether Inter say you have to retire and whether other clubs follow suit, it does raise questions, obviously, about player welfare and the medicals that players go through, and should they be more regular on a regular medical checkups. It has now transpired that he wasn't vaccinated against COVID-19 at Inter Milan. Could that have something to play with it? Obviously, the Danish camp and UEFA will release further press statements in time. The Russians, they were outclassed in their game by Belgium. Castagna suffers a nasty injury, so that's something we obviously have to keep an eye on. And England obviously winning 1-0. That's the first time England have won an opening game at a Euros, obviously in Euro 96, which obviously I very fondly remember. We drew against Switzerland and then won the rest of our group games. The games I've obviously seen so far, Austria are very, very good money over their win in over North Macedonia. Defensively, though, they look a bit shaky. Macedonia were also good value for money in their performance. The Dutch-Ukraine game, the Netherlands-Ukraine game, the defending wasn't a thing in that game. That was the most open game so far, possibly the most entertaining game of the tournament up to this point. 5-goal thriller. Could have gone either way. Dutch were cruising, nearly lost it. The Ukrainians get back in it, nearly win it, and then the Dutch go down the other end and win with a few minutes left to spare. That was, I think, the highlight of the tournament so far. And then obviously Scotland, Czech Republic. Scotland's first tournament appearance since 1998, and they showed a lot of promise in that game. They did play very, very well. A couple of mistakes undid them. The second goal, several players are at fault there. The goalkeeper, the midfielder who loses the ball. They were looking a little bit nervous, so they were snatching at chances. They were trying to force the play, so letting it flow naturally. But there's some good green shoots. I think Steve Clarke is doing a very good job as Scotland manager. Poland, Slovakia. Poland again, underwhelming. Lewandowski, ineffective. Is it the service? Is it the style of football they play? Slovakia did a job there, and then Spain, Sweden. Really bizarre game. Spain, Sweden game. The amount of chances Spain created, how that game finished 0-0 is beyond me. But it wasn't actually a great performance. Neither side had a plan B. Sweden's plan A was badly executed in their press, but paid off with the fact that they actually frustrated the Spanish, and Spain didn't have a plan B. So that's interesting. Tonight's games, Hungary are playing Portugal and Germany are playing France. So that is the group of death, in my opinion. That is the group which I think we may not see a third place team get out of. We may see a third place team get out of, but a big name team could fall at the first hurdle. And the Hungarians shouldn't be underrated. Look at their qualifying. Look at they can score goals. Portugal have got some aging players in Ronaldo. I know Ronaldo is still one of the best players in the world. And Pepe. Pepe could be exposed, I believe. And France, Germany. Germany are an enigma at the moment. Jogi Löw, this is the last tournament. As soon as Germany's last game is completed, he's stepping down. The last few tournaments, especially the World Cup, Germany have shown a lot of cracks in how they're performing. Uh, they've had a very successful spell in international football, a good 15 years, being so consistent, and it's starting to tail off. Is that on the coach? Is that on the players? Is that on the quality coming through? It'll be interesting to see how they play against the French, because that is a grudge match. Neither nation like each other when it comes to international football. There's a lot of history involved with those two nations. At 1982, for example, Battiston and Schumacher, that incident. These are two nations that don't like each other very much. It will be very interesting to see how that game plays out. Hungary are, I think, the dark horse. Portugal as well, holders of the tournament. The last winners, but I don't think they're the team that they were. They're too reliant on Ronaldo. It's a team game. It's not an individual game. Can other players step up? That's pretty much it. But the big news is only one game has been goalless so far, which has been really entertaining. It's like the last World Cup. Only one game was goalless. Now, hopefully, the rest of the group games goals are scored at a fantastic rate. I'm trying to work out the average of goals per game, but I believe it is up on the World Cup, and I believe it is up on the last Euros. So that to me says defences are more open. VAR hasn't really been a massive factor so far. I think there's only been one VAR decision, and that was in the Swiss game. So VAR hasn't really played a massive role, which is really good. I think they've changed the definition on handball. They've tweaked some of the rules, which I think are going to carry on for next season. I think UEFA and FIFA have realised some of the rule changes they made in 2019 with the Women's World Cup haven't helped the game. They might have hindered the game. And it is good to see that VAR hasn't really had a massive impact. It's only been involved in one game, and it got the decision right. And the time it took to get right was very, very quick. So, while we're getting towards the end of the first round of group matches, it is really interesting to see how it's playing out. Only 2 games today. Obviously, we've been spoiled with 3 games a day up to this point. So there's been a lot of action. There's been a lot of entertainment. And of course, I think we've only had 1 red card as well so far in Krychowiak getting sent off. So discipline's actually been surprisingly good. There's not been a lot of yellow cards, 1 red. That in itself is highly interesting. Discipline's been good. Goal scoring is up. And VAR is not really becoming the distraction it has in the last couple of tournaments. So I'm going to throw it open for questions. I'll be really interested to see what people have to say so far on the tournament. And I can break down every single game I've seen. I've got all my notes here. I mean, I've got notes coming out my backside. So I'll be really interested to see what you guys have as in questions. I mean, the fact it's a pan-European tournament, when it was announced all those years ago that it was going to be multiple cities across Europe, I wasn't overly keen on the idea. I believe in the host nation or co-hosts. I mean, I remember the first co-host Euros of Belgium and Holland in 2000. Brilliant tournament. I thought that was a very, very well run and very well watchable tournament, apart from obviously the crowd trouble off the field with certain nations misbehaving. Austria and Switzerland 2008 again was a very well hosted tournament. I found that very entertaining. And Ukraine and Poland in 2012 again was a really fun tournament to watch. But when UEFA came out and said, "Yep, the 2020 Euros will be a pan-European tournament," I had some reservations. I still do have some reservations. Obviously, with the pandemic we've had over the last 18 months, year and a half or so, that has obviously, raised the question of like, will UEFA do this again? They have said they won't. And of course, the weather conditions are different in each location. I mean, we've had matches in Azerbaijan to Hampden Park, and that has had an impact on some of the games. I mean, I look at the Italy-Turkey game that was played in Rome. Italy are the away team. That is a head scratcher for me. But that was a brilliant match. A warm evening, not overly hot, but a warm evening because it is Rome in June. It gets quite hot in central Italy. The Italians just, played a non-Italian style. The Italians played a very, very exciting South American style. I would have called it very attacking. The Turks just weren't at the races, and I think Turkey may not win a game. with that performance. The Wales-Switzerland game, I think the heat did have an impact in that game. There was a fair few mistakes. I mean, the Swiss could have won that game easily. They did throw it away. Wales were lucky to scrape a draw out of that, but they stuck in there. The Denmark-Finland game, obviously, with what happened to Christian Eriksen, a lot of question marks about whether the match should have continued. And obviously, the UEFA released a statement. The Finnish team, basically, the Finnish coach went to the Danish coach and said, whatever you decide, our players will be happy to go along with. If you don't want to play on, or if you do, or if you want to delay the second half until tomorrow or a later date, we are happy for that to be the case. Obviously, Christian Eriksen was conscious in hospital and spoke with his teammates and officials and said, yes, I'm happy for the game to continue. But the way I think that was handled will raise some questions. And I'll be interested to see what you guys have to say on the Christian Eriksen situation. The Finns took their goal very well. They sucker punched the Danes there a little bit, but in all context, I mean, should that game have restarted and how the tournament organisers would have handled that will be, up for debate. But it's done now. How will the Danes obviously respond going forward, and the Finns as well, because all the players were affected. It'll be interesting to see what the Danes do in the rest of the tournament and how they perform and how they play. I think the Austria game was in Hungary, in Budapest. That gets quite humid. I think that had an impact on that game. I think the Macedonians were gassed by the end of the game, and some of the Austrians were as well. The Dutch-Ukraine game was played in Amsterdam, so the humidity is a little bit less because it's a low-lying coastal city in reality, even though Amsterdam's actually a little bit inland with how the Netherlands and the drainage systems they have, but it is basically a coastal city, so humidity in theory should be a little bit less with a bit of a sea breeze. That was a thriller. The pace of that game was insane. Absolutely mental game. I think the first 10 minutes the ball went out of play once. That was a game played at 100 miles an hour like a freight train. Brilliant game that was. The Scotland game at Hampden Park, slightly cooler than the rest of the UK, but humidity is still in around 60 to 70%. But the temperature as well being a bit lower, I think, helped the pace of that game because Scotland kept up their tempo and the Czechs kept up their tempo for the entire game. There was no real drop-off in pace of the game. Poland, Slovakia, that was played in St. Petersburg, much like the Russia game against Belgium. Again, that's a coastal city, but Russia gets quite humid at this time of year, as we saw in the World Cup a few years ago. I didn't really see the pace of that game drop off, but the Spain-Sweden game is the one that really interests me, is how Sweden was so bad, but Spain had no plan B in order to get round what was the immovable object. The tactics Sweden employed were the right tactics, badly executed. I think if they got their press right and then pressed more effectively, Spain might lose that game. They don't have enough pace up front. The amount of defending the Swedes, I mean, we're talking like 87% possession for the Spanish, I think, at one point. No goals to show for it. That is a really worrying sign, considering Slovakia play a much better version of the press than Sweden and won their game, and they weren't favoured to do that. And Poland, well, I think Poland and Sweden may fail to get out of this group. This could be the group where there's no third-place team getting out of it. I think Spain will be heavily frustrated with how they played, and there are question marks about Spain. There are some serious question marks about a no plan B. Basically, they kept trying to basically repeat the same action over and over again, expecting a different result. That is the sign of madness. And with that kind of result, it makes the rest of the group stage really interesting. So I'm happy to take questions and see what you guys have to say. I mean, obviously, only one goalless game so far is much like the World Cup 3 years ago. Really good to see that goal scoring averages are up, and I will try and work out how many goals have been scored actually quickly. What the average is per game. I'll just get my calculator up. Where is my calculator? Right, so 3 plus 2 plus 1 plus 3 plus 1 plus 4 plus 5 plus 2 plus 3 equals 24. So we've had 24 goals so far in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games. So we'll divide 24 by 10. That's 2.4 goals per game. We are averaging 2.4 goals per game over the first 10 games. So, and looking at some of the teams that we've got coming up, we know the Hungarians can score a lot of goals. They did that in qualifying. Obviously, this is a step up in class for them, but we know that they can put the ball in the net. We know Portugal have the ability, if other players raise their game around Ronaldo, to score goals. We know the French and Germans, that could be a high scoring game with the quality that they have. We can see the average actually go up to near a 3. At the moment, it's 2.4. And I mean, it's worth noting that is pretty much close to the average we had 3 years ago at the World Cup in Russia. Was the average was going up? So I think Group F is the group of death. I can see a very good side going out of the tournament at the first hurdle. I can see the Hungarians being the dark horse, and I can see, I think maybe France topping that group. The Germans, they may not get out, but again, because obviously there's only 2 games to go, there's obviously less to report on. But yes, I do believe that is the toughest group. It's the last group to start, hence why I've only got the 2 games today. Tomorrow we have 3 games. The Finns play the Russians first. That's going to be really interesting. The Finns coming off that emotional win, the Russians coming off that humiliating loss at home, and Turkey, Wales, and Italy, Switzerland. But today only having 2 games is a bit weird. But again, we had the opening game by itself as a standalone game on Friday, in the Italians winning against the Turks. Turkey obviously want to bounce back against Wales. They're bottom of the group. Italy, Switzerland. I think that's going to be a very interesting match. I think the Swiss can feel a little bit frustrated they didn't put Wales away, and the Italians, I think they're the best team in the tournament so far on what we've seen. But it all depends on how tonight's games play out. And I think the Hungarians are the dark horse in Group F. I think Portugal, Germany, and I think to a certain extent France could be vulnerable. I mean, yes, France are world champions, but they weren't overly, how do I put this? They weren't overly exciting apart from a couple of games in the last World Cup. They were a workmanlike team with some really star players, but they didn't quite get it fully flowing, if that makes any sense. But I do agree that Group F is the toughest group. In my mind, there's no doubt about it. It is the toughest group. It'll be very interesting to see how they've looked at how the rest of the tournament's played out with the bracket, and of course, with 4 third place teams going through, that does make it very, very interesting. You want to win your group. I think the French are the favourites in that group. I think the Germans are looking very, very vulnerable. How they played their recent World Cup qualifiers, how they played some of the warm up games. Because bearing in mind, they have. I think they lost to Macedonia. In qualifying, they have had some really bizarre results. And Jurgi Löw, the way the World Cup ended in 2018, the way they crashed out at the group stage, the Mesut Ozil situation and how he retired from international football, citing racism and discrimination, and not feeling when we win I'm German, when we lose I'm a Turk. I don't feel part of this group that we've built. Some of their aging players still getting selected when in reality they're not performing. They're being selected on past deeds. The turnover of experienced veterans in that team. Yes, they qualified for the tournament, but some of their recent results in competitive internationals have been troubling. And of course, Jurgi Löw's been in charge since the days of Klinsmann. He's been in charge a long time. Yes, he's guided them to great success with the World Cup win, but they haven't won the Euros and they haven't won any other World Cups, obviously, since that World Cup win. So it will be interesting. But obviously, France, back the World Cup win, a lot of their players are playing in form. They've got Benzema back in the fold, so that's another attacking threat with Mbappe. And if Pogba can actually be focused because Pogba is hit and miss. Yeah, the French look dangerous, and it's like going back to '98, 2000, when they win the World Cup and they win the Euros. It's like Spain winning the Euros, World Cup, and Euros. They're in that zone where they're peaking. Have they peaked? Because they got to the Euros final in 2016, losing out to Portugal. Then they win the World Cup. So have they already peaked? That'll be interesting. But I'd say the Hungarians, for me, are the dark horse in that group. There's no expectation on them, but in qualifying, they can score goals, a lot of goals. And his goal scoring, as I say, is at 2.4 goals per game. That says to me goal scoring averages are up. And as I say, the Netherlands Ukraine was the most open, entertaining game as a neutral I've seen in God, I'm going to say 20, 25 years since I was a kid. I've never seen a game just with no defending. It was a throwback to 80s style football, or South American. It was a South American style. The Dutch have no structure, and in attack, that's what you want. You want to have free flowing, off the cuff, expressive flair football. It's in defence you want structure, and that's why I think the Dutch won't win the tournament. They'll entertain, absolutely, but I don't think they'll win the tournament because they have no structure. And the Ukrainians, while they had structure, they just got blitzed for a period in that second half. But then they came back themselves and blitzed the Dutch because they fought their way back into the game. I think the Dutch were lucky to get away with a win in that game. They could have easily lost that, and that completely changed the complexion of that group. So, it's all very open at the moment. There's a lot of openness about this tournament so far, and it really does throw up a lot of what ifs. But we haven't seen all the teams play their first game yet, so it'll be interesting to see how the performances tonight will I mean, I've got to see what the teams are playing, actually. I mean, they're playing all over the place. So it'll be interesting to see where the two matches tonight are being played, because I think weather conditions will have an impact. I think the first game will be more humid and more heat. And with the Germans and the French playing that little bit later, that might mean a more high-paced game. Let's have a look. Of course, the Copa America has been played at the same time, but I'm not staying up and watching the Copa America at 6 o'clock in the morning because I do need sleep. Interesting that may be. Right, so Hungary are playing in Budapest. So Hungary are at home against Portugal. That'll be an advantage. The Portuguese will not like the atmosphere in there. That'll be very, very just be full of Hungarians. So they're playing in Budapest, and the French-German game is being played in Munich. So Germany are actually the home team, ironically. But they're not. They're the away team on the fixture, but they will have a lot of home support. I mean, the pundits are predicting a 1-1 draw, but I can't see that with the Germans. I really can't. And this is their first meeting in a group stage tournament. They've met before, always in the knockout stages. France are unbeaten in their past 5 games against Germany on German soil. That is quite interesting. France have also won 14 of their 19 games since the 2014 World Cup. And of course, Jurgen Low and Didier Deschamps are the 2 longest-serving international managers at this tournament as well. That's something I didn't know. But yes, basically, I think playing in Munich is advantage Germany in that sense. However, I think the French have got their number in this one. I think the French have got just the better team and the more positive camp. But no, it will be interesting. I think that is the group of death. That's the first time Germany and France have met in the group stage at a major tournament. Every other time has been in the knockout stages when the game's been a little bit more. But looking at how the results have gone so far, I would think that you don't want to play for that best third place team. You want to win or take advantage of as many games as possible and get as many points as possible and try and win every game. And the only result where I haven't really seen that is Spain and Sweden. But what are people's thoughts on the tournament so far? Because I want to see what people's feedback is, because we've only got 2 games until the first round of fixtures is done before we go into the second round of group stage matches. And this is, you want to win your first game. So I think Turkey, they looked poor. But every other team, apart from I think Sweden and Spain, have actually, well, Spain obviously created a lot of chances, but every other team has really performed rather well, even in defeat. And there's only been 2 draws, so that in itself is remarkable. That only 2 games have ended in draws, and it's either a win or defeat. So this is where I think that third place, best third place teams go through could be really, really interesting, because teams are giving it a go because they know it's going to be a lottery to get out of the group if you finish third. I'm not overly sold on that format. I mean, if you're going to have, that's where I think, just go to 32 teams for the Euros then, or go back to 16. I think 32 where they'll end up, much like the World Cup used to be, because then it's just the top 2 teams from each group go through. But I mean, some of these nations in years past wouldn't have qualified for a Euros, for example. So Wales have only qualified for this one and the previous. So Wales have only qualified for the last 2. Finland, this is their first appearance. Macedonia, first appearance. Austria haven't had a great history in the Euros. So they're qualified every now and then. Ukraine, it's only in recent years that they've started, from 2006 onwards, that they've started to really produce players. Scotland haven't obviously qualified since 1998, and even then they've only had 2 previous appearances at the Euros. Slovakia and the Czech Republic, I mean, the Czechs have always had a good team and qualified for every Euro since 1996. Slovakia, again, in recent times, since 2010, have started qualifying for tournaments. But, some of these nations, especially Finland and North Macedonia and Wales, under previous qualifying formats and when it was 16 teams, wouldn't have qualified. Even for World Cups as well, they haven't really qualified. They haven't been So some of these nations under older formats with the tournament as it was wouldn't have got here. The Nations League, I think, is helping teams like North Macedonia and Finland, make the qualification process. And I'm not overly sold on the Nations League format as things stand. However, it is helping some of these smaller nations improve the quality of their teams by going up the world rankings, such as North Macedonia have halved their ranking in the world from like 100 something to 60 something. They are the lowest ranked team at the tournament, but their ranking has been increasing, it's been improving in a very short space of time. Finland's first major tournament period, win their first game, so they can class this tournament, regardless how they finish in the group, if they get out of the group, as a success. Wales, they have the players, I think, to qualify more regularly for tournaments. I think all the home nations, should be regularly battling for qualification. But Wales were actually quite poor in that draw. But again, some of these nations that are winning these games, like Italy, the Netherlands, you've got the Czechs. These are regular appearances at tournaments. These are the nations that regularly qualify for international tournaments. Others less regular. So it is interesting. I'm not sold on the best 4 third place team format. I think that is rewarding failure. I think if you're going to expand the tournament, just go to 32 teams eventually. Whether fans will agree with that or not is another thing, but I think it increases the exposure of some players who to the international spotlight. And yeah, you will have some very entertaining games. I mean, as I say, the goal scoring average is at 2.4 per game. And I expect that to go up tonight. I expect some high scoring games tonight as well. I expect both games to be very high scoring. And then obviously tomorrow we have 3 games again. I do expect, again, the goal scoring to go up. Obviously, England Scotland, I think, is the game that the UK is looking forward to, and I think that will be a very crucial game for both sides. England only scoring one goal in the first game. It would have helped if we'd scored more. And Croatia losing their game really makes the England Scotland game vital. So if England win that, they've got 2 wins, 6 points. They're going through to the next round. Whereas Scotland, they lose that, and the Croatians beat the Czechs, then it means Scotland-Croatia becomes the crucial game for them. More added pressure. I mean, what Steve Clarke's done with Scotland, in my opinion, is fantastic from where he took them from to where they are now. And, I think he is the right man for the Scotland job. This is a learning curve for these Scottish players. Some of these Scottish players weren't alive when they last appeared at a tournament in 1998. And that tells you something. That has been a very long gap between, drinks at the bar. It is amazing that Scotland haven't qualified for a major tournament for that long. And the other home nations, even Northern Ireland, have been at tournaments more regularly than Scotland in recent. That tells you that there are issues with Scottish football. They are slowly being corrected, but there needs to be more work done in the domestic game and further afield in player development. I think Steve Clarke is the right guy to bring them forward. It's like Italy with them failing to qualify for the last World Cup, and then Mancini selecting players from unfashionable clubs in Italy, for example. I mean, that's got the Italian media and the Italian fans talking, but he's getting results. Unbeaten in 28. Unbeaten in 28 internationals. If a club team was unbeaten in 28 games, you're going, they're going to win a title. That's why I think Italy, from looking at the opening round of fixtures and looking how things have gone. I mean, obviously the French might put a number down tonight. The Hungarians might surprise the Portuguese and put some goals in the net. Portugal might actually play as a team rather than as an individual with 10 other players attached to him. If that happens, then my opinion might change. But I think the Italians are the best team at this tournament so far, and what I've seen and how they played, and the fact that they have a good mix of veterans and youngsters all playing together. I mean, the fact that Bonucci and Chiellini are still playing is amazing. I was looking actually at the 2006 Italian World Cup winning squad, and the only player still playing is Buffon. All the others have retired. And Chiellini, I think, came into the squads. He missed out on the 2006 World Cup just. I think he was very young at the time. But that just tells you that, that it's only in the last couple of years that someone like De Rossi's only retired recently. But in the last couple of years that the last few winners of that World Cup have started to retire, and Buffon wants to go one more year. So that in itself, 15 years gap is ridiculous. But the Italians have gone through this. We need to refresh. We need to renew. The club game isn't quite what it was at the time. Fresh blood. And when you've got clubs like Atalanta mixing things up, and Sassuolo challenging the established order in Italian football and really mixing up, it breathes fresh life into Serie A. And I was looking at the current Serie A teams, and there's a lot of unfamiliar teams in there to me, and a lot of the familiar teams that I remember from the 90s. Palermo in like the 4th division now. Bari are in there, like Lecce are in there. I'm thinking, well, these were teams that were pretty solid teams in the 90s. They're not in Serie A anymore. So there's been a massive overhaul of that league system. And the only team never to be relegated out of Serie A is Inter. And lo and behold, they were champions this year for the first time in over a decade. Again, I think that's a positive for Italian football, a new name on the Scudetto. The shift in power in Italian football, I think, is benefiting the national side. But yeah, any more questions? Because I'm really interested to see what other thoughts people have on the tournament so far. I mean, there's been some players who I've never even heard of before, like popping up, and when you've got players like Pandev, the 3rd oldest player at the tournament, at nearly 38, scoring a goal, that's brilliant for the game as well. He's the 2nd oldest goal scorer of all time at Euros. He's the 3rd oldest player at this Euros after Pepe and Stecklenburg. Second oldest outfield player. He's been playing international football for 20 years. That tells you something. 20 years he's been an international football player. That's a great story in itself. The Dutch, very young, exciting team. Wijnaldum, Benkhorst, and Dumfries scoring goals. So you had an attacking midfielder, a centre forward, and a wing back scoring their goals. I mean, the 2 goals in the Czech Republic. The second goal for the Czechs was Schick's, shot from the halfway line. Echoes of David Beckham for Man United against Sullivan, the Wimbledon goalie in '96. Echoes of another very famous goal where a Scottish goalkeeper is getting done from the halfway line. There's been a few other outrageous shots from the halfway line that have gone in, but that is David Beckham-esque. And what I find really funny is Slovakia and the Czechs, former Czechoslovakia, both the successor nations of that, both winning their opening games and both scoring 2 goals. I mean, that's just bizarre. I don't think that's ever happened before at a tournament. So yeah, there's a lot of interest and positivity. One thing I will say is I wasn't sold on the Pan-European tournament. I understand why UEFA did it, but UEFA said it's never happening ever again. So make the most of it. I think, some teams have a lot of travel ahead of them, especially in the group containing Poland, Slovakia, Spain, Sweden, Seville, and St. Petersburg. Obviously, Dublin losing a couple of games there has thrown the travel situation in that group wide open, and the conditions in St. Petersburg will be completely different than conditions in Seville. So when Sweden and Spain have to play in St. Petersburg, for example, that's going to completely affect how they play their second matches. I think Spain are playing all their games in Seville, I believe. But Sweden, Poland, and Slovakia have a fair bit of travel around that group, and that could affect how results go. That could favour Spain, but we shall see. But yes, any further questions? We know that Group F is, in my opinion, the group of death. I mean, but again, some of the other groups we could see a big name nation not make it through. The Russians, for example, may not get out of their group. Belgium won easily. They've got to play a very emotional Danish team tomorrow, and that could be very, very interesting. How the Danes are feeling and how they perform. Their star man, their creative player, Christian Eriksen, is obviously no longer there. Will that motivate and galvanise the rest of the Danish team? The Belgians. It's going to be interesting how that game plays out. And the Finns and the Russians, they don't really like each other, and I think Finland, while they were basically very defensive, they still went down the other end and scored. So, and they've got a bit about them, and the Russians, how badly they performed in their game. I think the Finns could get 2 wins in this group and really throw it wide open. So I think the Russians may struggle. The Austria, North Macedonia, Ukraine, Netherlands group, defensively, there is a lack of defending basically in this group. This group could have loads of goals in it. It already has. It's the highest scoring group right now. There could be some massive scorelines in. I mean, the Netherlands, if they play like they did against Ukraine, they could put 6 or 7 past North Macedonia. Quite frankly, and if the Austrians play again, they score quite well. The Austria-Netherlands game could be 4-4. It could be a bizarre, insane game, which poses the theory could there be a lot of goals, because I'm not sold on the Dutch defensively or the Austrians, to be fair. So yeah, there's a lot obviously to think about. But any further questions? I've been rambling for a bit, but no, I do think this is a wide open tournament. I can't see a favourite. I think the Italians for me are the favourites so far, but we've still got 4 nations to play, obviously, their first round of fixtures. But the way the Italians just sucked the life out the Turks, and then suddenly in the second half, bang, 3 goals in I think 20 minutes. They had the game under control, and then they just turned it up. I think the Austria Holland group is the most interesting and exciting so far, but I'm not sold on any of those teams winning the tournament. And then you look at England winning their first opening game at Euros ever. Could that bode well for the rest of the tournament? Only scoring one goal with the dominance they showed. Again, there's still question marks over the England team. We need to be scoring more goals and making our route out of the group and out through the knockout stages a bit more comfortable, if I'm honest. But yeah, like looking at the opening games, obviously the big talking point is the Christian Eriksen situation. Now, if I can discuss the Italian medical, under Italian law, they have the strictest sports medicals anywhere in the world. They take athlete welfare really seriously in Italy. So even if you've got the slightest heart murmur, nope, you cannot be a professional athlete. Now, that law has been in place for over 2 decades and has actually seen the rate of cardiac arrest fall rapidly. It's dropped by 2.5 percentage points, which doesn't sound a lot, but it has reduced death and ill health massively. Now, the only reason why I mention that in regards to Christian Eriksen is Manuel Almunia. Now, people, Arsenal Watford fans, you can mock him or praise him and love him as a cult hero or whatever. But Manuel Almunia, he came to the end of his Watford contract. He was a free agent, basically. He was allowed to leave on a free and he wanted to sign with Cagliari, who are obviously a Serie A team on the island of Sardinia in Italy. And he was in the middle of his medical and they found he had a heart condition and they told him, you have to retire on medical grounds. We are very, very sorry. We cannot sign you. So that's, where my interest in this came to light. And I have discussed player welfare before on this channel. I have. And I think UEFA may start, and other sporting federations as well, not just football, actually may start becoming stricter in pre-season medicals and medicals at new teams and making, let's say, more regular medicals for players. It has since transpired that Christian Eriksen did not have the COVID-19 vaccination. As the Inter Milan team doctor has stated that. It has also, transpired that, he did pass his medical when he first signed for the club back in January 2020. So, obviously, he slipped through the cracks if there is an ongoing heart condition that he was undiagnosed. We don't know what's caused this. He still had a pulse before he went into cardiac arrest. That's from the Danish team doctor. So when he collapsed on the ground, he was still breathing and had a pulse. So obviously, until the Danish camp and the doctors at Copenhagen and UEFA release statements, it is pure speculation, which I think is unfair. But it does raise some questions about athlete welfare and should there be more regular medicals for players? Should there be, this is not the only incident that's happened. I mean, we've seen it in other sports as well. Bouwmeester for the St. Louis Blues in the NHL collapsing on the bench, very similar. A very similar incident in the sense that he was in the middle of a game and had a very similar health emergency. We've seen it obviously with Fabrice Muamba, and of course Marc-Vivien Foé is the famous one who actually died and couldn't be revived at the time. So it happens very, very rarely, but it has happened. I mean, Daley Blind has collapsed twice on the pitch during games, less severe than Christian Eriksen, but it was found that he did have is it mycocardia or something? Mycocardio, which is like a bacterial infection of the heart muscle. He has got that electronic pacemaker device. He's allowed to play. Fabrice Muamba has the same device but isn't allowed to play because he was more of a serious case. So Christian Eriksen, I would think his career is over, simply because he's an Inter player, and I think they will have to, under Italian law, be forced to retire him. They'll probably pay him out and have him as a consultancy role at the club or something. They'll look after him, but I don't think he's allowed to play anymore because he stopped breathing on the pitch. David Blind did not stop breathing. And again, the situations are different, but they were teammates at Ajax as well, so that I think adds an extra element into this. But I do think UEFA will look at strengthening the rules around player medicals. I think that's something that will come out of this. I can't see there being no action taken. I think other domestic leagues as well, I think, and other sports will look at what's happened with Christian Eriksen and have a look at their playing groups and go, right, okay, let's have a look at the medicals, let's have a look at athlete welfare, because you make us the money. If you're on the pitch, that's actually a bad image. Whilst it was shocking, yes, the TV companies have been criticised for their coverage of it, and I think rightly so. I did see a social media post saying, well, when a streaker or a pitch invader comes on for a laugh, you look away, the cameras go away, they don't give him airtime. When a player is fighting for his life on the pitch, you focus on the player, family, all that. Yeah, I think my problem as well was the coverage. My partner, her friend, her dad died in a similar way playing Sunday League football. My dad died in a very similar way. I had to go outside. I went to talk to my neighbour in the block of flats. I couldn't stay in the room. I think I don't think it's solely on the BBC. Bear in mind, UEFA give out the broadcast rights. All the broadcasters, I think, have been heavily criticised across the world, not just in Europe, but across the world. The BBC got a lot of flack in the day or two following. I will state this: when they actually were informed of what was going on, they did cut back to the studio. However, when they were focusing on Christian Eriksen's poor wife, that in itself was wrong. When Christian Kjær, the Danish, the Danish captain, and the Finnish player was near him, basically were calling for immediate assistance, that was a sign that something was seriously wrong. Cut straight away. And when the players are gathering, because the players, Kjær realised on the big screen that the broadcasters were still filming the incident, hence why the Danish players formed a circle and the Finnish players politely formed their own circle around the touchline and basically walked away. And I think one of the Finnish player very near him was very distressed, so his teammates actually were basically getting him down the tunnel by the end. Yes, they did, but yeah, the social media reaction, not just the BBC, but I think all the broadcasters deserve some criticism of the handling of the incident. And then some of the questions in the Belgian game when they were interviewing Lukaku, some of those questions were highly inappropriate. I've seen, I've watched the interview he gave. I forget if it was to Belgian TV or Dutch TV. They did the interview in English, but you can tell he wasn't really happy to give an interview at all post game. And they're shoving a microphone in his face, and that's his teammate, that is his colleague, who he sees more like family, and he within like it's just not right. So I think the media have really mishandled this. The European media have really mishandled this whole incident from the minute it happened to continuing now. They're not asking the right questions, going, well, what are UEFA's protocols on player medicals for internationals? Do the players have, when they go to international camp, have to have a medical? No, I don't think they do. club level, when you sign for a new club or when you're in the process of signing, you have to have a medical. And as I say, under Italian law, if you're found to have a cardiac arrest or a heart condition, you're done. You retire. So I think Christian Eriksen's career is done, unfortunately, and prematurely, which is really sad. But at the same time, he's still alive, which is a miracle in itself. Well, yes, the initial collapse is. They initially showed the replay on the BBC because they don't know why he's hit the ground. I initially thought when he's going for the throw in that the Finnish player has accidentally clipped him, as obviously the ball's gone out and he's tripped over. But as soon as he collapsed, the Finnish player is instantly turning to his bench, and then he's screaming at Danish player. I think Kjær was the nearest Danish player, going, "Get your medics on!" And both those players were straight away calling for medical assistance. Their quick thinking, and especially Kjær, the Danish captain, have definitely saved his life. The initial replay, though, you're expecting a replay because it's an incident, but when you clearly know it's a medical and it's not to do with anything else, then yeah, I think the coverage should have been a bit more tasteful. But bear in mind, we're talking about media coverage. They kept filming Hazel in '85, the Bradford City fire in '85, and Hillsborough in '89. They kept the cameras going for hours as people were dying. So let's remember what the media is all about. The mainstream media can be highly distasteful, and bearing in mind all those incidents in the '80s happened in the years and the months before I was born, but the footage is out there. I've seen documentaries on football hooliganism and stadium disasters and all that and sports history. You can easily find the images of Hazel, Hillsborough, and the Bradford City fire. Easily, there are people dying in those incidents. The footage is still up online. The footage is still archived. It's still broadcast. When they're going on about the Hillsborough inquiry, they are still broadcasting. They're still showing the images of people actually dying at the time on the news. So they don't care. It's to create. The media is highly distasteful. It's. I do think, as we're now in the 21st century, or we should be a little bit more respectful. This is not the '80s anymore, or the '90s. We should be far more decent when it comes to it. And this is why people are turning off the mainstream media, because of Christian Eriksen, the way that was handled. On the same token, yes, it was a very distressing incident as well. And the way the media handled it in the post-match interviews with other players following in all the game was wrong. The fact that obviously England were due to have a press conference that evening because their game, obviously against Croatia, was the following day. They decided straight away to cancel their media commitments. Now, whether that's in solidarity with Christian Eriksen and his family, because the media and the home nations. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, to a certain extent the Republic, if you follow the Republic of Ireland. Yeah, the way that James McLean has been dealt with in regards to his personal views on the poppy, even though he has raised a hell of a lot of cash for the NHS in the last 18 months, goes unsung because of his views on wearing the poppy, because of his family roots in both the north and the south, because he could play for either country. Marcus Rashford and Raheem Sterling. Now, I'm not a fan of Raheem Sterling as the player. I don't think he's consistent enough. But the way he's been handled and the way Rashford's been handled in the media is pretty disgraceful. And Rashford's done a huge amount of work for underprivileged kids and underprivileged people in his local community where he was brought up. It's got nothing to do with the fact he's a professional football player. He's actually done a lot of community work. During the pandemic when there was no football, he was like, I've got to do something. I'm going to help the community which has raised me, which has given me my values. And guess what? I benefited from, a lot of these help schemes for poorer families. I'm going to do my bit while we are having a crisis in looking after our most vulnerable. And he's getting... Oh, he has a bad game. And and it's like the Villarreal Europa League final. He counted so much abuse on social media. Social media is now just as vile as the mainstream media, and it's less subtle about its discriminatory tactics. I mean, the way they've handled the taking of the knee, I think, yeah, it is a political statement. Whatever the FA says, it's become very divisive, and it shouldn't. But unfortunately, the BLM movement is actually a Marxist movement, and the mainstream media are refusing to acknowledge that aspect of it. And we don't get booze when the Kick It Out T-shirts and the Rainbow Laces campaigns are against discrimination on race or sexual orientation and gender. But then we do get it. You can disagree with something and not be what the other side is saying. We have lost that ability to have reasonable debate in the last 4 or 5 years. But the way I think the mainstream media is stoking the fire, and with the Christian Eriksen thing, I'm going back to that, they were utterly disgraceful. Social media as well, the positivity on social media, this is where social media have done a lot of good stuff, has been very positive. There are still trolls out there. I've seen one or two, and I thought, and so you're going to find the odd idiot. But when there is a definite divide, and the media play on that. But yeah, the coverage of the Eriksen incident was wrong. It'll be interesting to see, though, on UEFA's standpoint, what they bring in regards to player safety and welfare when it comes to medicals and regular health checkups. That's something that's going to be interesting to see what comes out of this. It will obviously happen post-tournament, because every post-tournament UEFA do a review on what worked well, what worked badly. They have actually tweaked the offside, the VAR, and the handball back to what it was in 2018. So VAR hasn't had the massive impact it has in previous tournaments. Only been involved in one decision, and he got it correct and did it within a minute. So VAR has actually worked so far and hasn't actually really been a problem, which is nice to see. As Kane said in Group F, is the hardest group, or the group of death. It is. I think the organisers have worked that out when the groups were announced. They saved the best for last. Germany, France is the last first round of group games to kick off. That could be the best game so far. It could be a very nasty, gnarly game. It could be full of yellow cards and fouls. We just don't know. But definitely the best has been saved for last. I'm looking forward to tonight's games. I think the Hungarians could be a dark horse in that group. I think Portugal are too reliant on one or two players in Ronaldo and a couple of others. And if he has an off night, Portugal will have an off night. They're too reliant on one player, which is, yes. Here's the thing: because you've got the best third place teams, that really throws a lot of things into the mix. We could see, especially in Group F, a big nation going out in the first round. We could actually see, because of goal difference and because of for and against, we could see a big nation going out. I can see the Russians possibly not getting out of their group. I can see possibly France or Germany, if one of them slip up. And I think Hungary are the dark. No one expects Hungary to do anything. They could probably win all 3 games now and go get out of the group, which will just be bizarre. The Dutch, I'm not sold on the Dutch defensively, but going forward, they're brilliant. Spain, well, they had no plan B. Sweden had no plan B, so that was the worst game so far. Yeah, I mean, I expected. I also, me and my neighbour Adam have been trying to predict results, and we both said Scotland would batter the Czechs, and that wasn't the case. So I haven't placed any bets in for this tournament. I've stopped betting completely. I do think that the Hungarians could actually probably win all 3 games in their group, or they could lose all 3 games. I think this tournament, because it's pan-European, so the conditions are different in every city. So Hampden Park was a lot different to Wembley the day before. Wembley the day before was high humidity, close to 30 degrees. Hampden Park was barely 20 degrees, still high humidity, but the pace of the game continued throughout. Whereas in the England Croatia game, when I saw the second half, they were almost at a crawl. Whereas the Holland Ukraine game was played at 100 miles an hour for 90 minutes because it was kicked off at 8 o'clock our time, 9 o'clock Holland time, and the temperatures had cooled off a little bit. That's why I think the France Germany game could be high pace tonight. This is why I think Hungary playing in Budapest against Portugal. Yes, the Portuguese are used to hot temperatures when it comes to their home internationals and all that. When they're playing their league games and at the beginning and the end of the seasons, the temperatures in Portugal are higher in August and April when they start their season, much like when we start our season. But the Hungarians are playing at home in Budapest with fans in the stadium, and they can score goals. The Hungarians are the dark horses because no one expects them to do anything because their domestic league isn't as strong as it used to be, and they are very underrated. We know they can score goals. Look at their qualifying. Look at their qualifying campaign. Hungary can score goals. The fact the tournament's been delayed by a year may have helped some of the younger players. Some players who may have been carrying a few injuries this time last year may have had some time off, may have been rested by their clubs, rotated. But I'm still not sold on the pan-European aspect of it with the travel as well and the conditions may being different all over the place is brilliant. But why the Russia World Cup works so well because it was such a lot, and the Brazil World Cup were both really entertaining World Cups is because of the travel in one nation. Where here you've got, instead of having one nation, so the fans, because the fans are allowed to go, having to deal with this was the initial concern. You've got different time zones, different currencies, different laws. Azerbaijan is technically a Muslim majority country. They have stricter laws on alcohol and curfew, for example, than, let's say, we do. Non-pandemic, obviously. Obviously, we're in a pandemic right now, but Azerbaijan is a Muslim country. Turkey, if there were games in Istanbul, for example, is a secular Muslim country, but again, customs and cultures are different. Certain laws are different, currencies and all that. So when you're playing a pan-European, you could be, what you're doing in one country is actually legal. So Holland, smoking cannabis in a cafe, where in the next country down, you're breaking the law. UEFA did say they would never do it again. When Platini obviously got done for being a crook and Serafin took over, one of the first things he stated was, "We are never doing a pan-European tournament again. We are taking a massive risk. It's a one-off because it's meant to be the 60th anniversary tournament, but we're never doing it ever again." Fact. That's what Serafin said when he took over. UEFA said, "We're not doing this ever again." It's just too much. We have had co-hosts, even for World Cups. We are going to have 3 co-hosts for an upcoming World Cup after Qatar. We're going to have the USA, Canada, and Mexico as co-hosts. They're going to expand the World Cup even further. Fuck me. But we've had Austria and Switzerland. We've had Poland and Ukraine. We've had Belgium and Holland, the Netherlands. So we've had co-hosts in the Euros before. But as they're expanding the tournament, I can see the tournament ending up being a 32 teams, much like the World Cup currently is in format, although they want to expand for Qatar, but as the World Cup currently is. If that is the case, yes, a single nation can host 32 teams. But I can see co-hosting where, let's say, we have Sweden and Denmark, for example, co-host the Euros, or Spain and Portugal. The UK and Ireland, which was meant to be a backup plan for this. We could see more, like it could be the Czech Republic and Slovakia co-host a tournament. The old former Czechoslovakia. That would be really interesting, actually, how that would work. But I think I think the goal for UEFA is to grow it to 32 teams, which I actually think would be actually kind of good. You get rid of that stupid Nations League format, and you just go back to 32 because you'll still get the same nations qualifying that you would get qualifying out of the Nations League, like not a North Macedonia and a Finland and a Wales. Even though Wales have started to qualify for a couple of tournaments in a row now, you get some of these nations that may not have qualified before uh, for a Euros or qualified for a long time, um, like Scotland. Maybe Qatar should have co-hosted instead of isn't maybe Qatar should have co-hosted instead of building a load of stadiums they don't need. The Qatar World Cup should never have happened anyway. Um, Seriously, playing in a desert, yeah, work that one out. Work that one out. Playing in a desert. Um, they only went there for the money, and yeah, with the Christian Eriksen situation, there was a lot of comments on social media. Was it heat exhaustion? No. 17 degrees in Denmark that evening. Um, I I don't think heat exhaustion necessarily was a problem. Dehydration maybe, because you're running around and obviously expending energy. But heat exhaustion, I wouldn't have thought would have been a cause for what happened to Christian Eriksen. But in Qatar, we could see a lot of Christian Eriksen type incidents with that heat, even in later in the year. It's still 40 degrees in the day at times. It's a desert. Um, I think yeah, an Australia New Zealand World Cup would be um, interesting. It is rapidly growing as a sport down there. Um, so absolutely, I can see that possibly happening. However, you have to take into account that the NRL and AFL would probably be the ones as to get in the way and say no, because you would have to share stadiums with the NRL, especially, and possibly the AFL to an extent. And is the infrastructure in place? Yes, the infrastructure is in place, but at the time of the year you would have to play the tournament, you are clashing massively, especially with the NRL and to a certain extent rugby union, which would have to play at the same time, and you get a clash. That is the problem. Um, the organisers would have to think, okay, and they can't move it because our winter is their summer, and it does get Qatar-esque temperatures in parts of Australia. Uh, so again, player welfare is of a prime concern. Um, you don't want to be playing in and bear in mind North Queensland is tropical. Um, so when you get to like Cairns and Townsville, you're in the tropics. So you have to bear that in mind. We saw look what happened in Brazil with like places like Manaus and Recife, where the players were having to have water breaks because it was 40 degrees and they're in the tropics. You have to bear that in mind. It would be great if Australia and New Zealand could have a World Cup, but then you would either have to I don't think the NRL and the AFL would be, as leagues domestically, where they're the dominant leagues, where they're the ones that make the most revenue domestically in Australia, would be happy to lose massive amounts of money by suspending their leagues for 6 weeks in order for the stadiums that would be needed to be used to be available. I don't think the NRL and the AFL would be happy to do that. Although, on saying that, with the COVID pandemic, the NRL and the AFL did use hub cities for teams. I'm not sure they would be happy to have to suspend their leagues because they would have to for the FIFA World Cup. They would either have to start their seasons earlier and finish their seasons later with a massive pause in the middle, or have a reduced, condensed season. And of course, you've got State of Origin in the NRL. You have the All Star game in both the AFL and the NRL as well. They are big money makers as well. I'm not sure how they feel about it. No, most Australian football teams don't own their stadiums. They co-share with other NRL, rugby union, and AFL teams. They co-share. Like the West Bankwest is used by about 4 different teams. Gold Coast Stadium, Cbus Super is used by a couple of teams, including the Gold Coast Titans. Yeah, I think AAMI Park in Melbourne is used by a couple of teams. I think some of the Australian teams do use their own stadiums, but others ground share. Um, we have had Southern Hemisphere nations host in the past, but you have to bear in mind that um, it was there was more it was more feasible. Um, so South Africa, to a certain extent, parts of Brazil, Argentina have, Chile have, but not many. Not many Southern Hemisphere teams have, um, because it's their winter, our summer, and you want to play in the summer. Um, it's just how it works out. Uruguay have, obviously in the past as well. So yeah, it is doable. Pollen, hay fever. Oh dear, sneezing fit on live on live YouTube. That's brilliant. Oh yes, Southern Hemisphere nations have hosted World Cups in the past, especially and even in Rugby World Cup as well, and Rugby League World Cup. So World Cups have been hosted globally. That's why they're called World Cups. But I will say this: in the Football World Cup, the apart from South Africa, the other nations hosted the Southern Hemisphere have obviously been in South America, which the South American hostings in the Southern Hemisphere, uh, the conditions are very much like the Northern Hemisphere, just Argentina and Chile, possibly further north, you've got a little bit less wintry conditions. And most of the populations of Chile and Argentina are in the north of those countries, so it's more like a Mediterranean type climate at best. Um, However, yes, Australia would be a good fit for a World Cup. Um, the stadiums are already there. There's some really lovely stadiums already in Australia, um, which could easily host. I mean, the MCG, they play Aussie rules there. The grand final, 100,000 people. So yes, you could have some big crowds. And we've seen the Olympic Games, we've seen the Commonwealth Games in Australia. You know, they hosted the Rugby League World Cup 4 years ago. So yes, they can host big events in Australia. The Rugby Union World Cup, they've done it before with great success. I think co-hosting with New Zealand would be a good bet. Again, New Zealand have the stadium infrastructure, but it's obviously you've got to take in consideration that when the World Cup would have to be hosted, unless they do it like Qatar later in the year, I'm not sure the NRL, the Super Rugby, and the AFL would be happy clashing with the World Cup because it is because of the TV revenue and the TV audience and the domestic fan base. England and Wales, yes, or Great Britain. You could have all four home nations being co-hosts. You could have all four nations being co-hosts. Cardiff and Swansea. You've got three stadiums that are brilliant. You've got the Principality Stadium. You've got Cardiff's home ground, and you've got obviously the Liberty. Scotland, you've got Murrayfield and Hampden Park. You could also put in Ibrox, Pittodrie, and Parkhead in there. England, you've obviously got Wembley, Emirates, White Hart Lane, Brentford's new stadium. I mean, any stadium in London really could you could host the whole bloody tournament in London. I know that's not fair on the rest of the country, but in theory you could. I think every club stadium in London, apart from maybe Orient Stadium and Wimbledon Stadium, are big enough to host internationals. And I'm putting the Valley and Selhurst Park in there. I do believe you could have an international there. The Rugby World Cup used Brighton's Amex Stadium and Exeter's Sandy Park. I mean, the Amex has hosted international sport, admittedly rugby union, but you know, yes, a home nations World Cup would be brilliant with four co-hosts: Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England all co-hosting. That'd be absolutely brilliant. The new Griffin Park. I mean, I haven't been yet. I would like to go. However, obviously, as things currently stand, obviously I want to get tickets for the Rugby League World Cup. We'll see if I can get tickets for the Emirates for the Rugby League World Cup, but again, we don't know what things hold. I mean, UEFA for the UEFA UEFA Cup, the Euros, the stadium capacity can be less. FIFA states that it must be 35,000 seats there. It's because they want to maximise revenue for the corporates. I think there are enough stadiums where you could host a World Cup in this country. In fact, most of the stadiums in London, by the time England would be able to bid for a World Cup, or Great Britain would be able to bid for a World Cup, would have been expanded to meet the FIFA protocols. But I think those protocols are flawed massively, because it then basically states to other nations that want to qualify, you're limiting the amount of stadiums, and therefore the same stadiums get used over and over again. And those clubs that own those stadiums are going to get some revenue, which creates a two-tier system within a league structure. But no, there are definitely stadiums that could definitely host internationals. Whether we get a World Cup or a Euros is another thing. I mean, this live stream is going to be about discussing what's happened at the Euros so far and looking at the games today. But the questions being raised are interesting. Where we would like to see the next Euros or a future Euros and a future World Cup. It is interesting, but the bidding process has to change. The fact Qatar, I mean, Russia, I can accept having a World Cup. Qatar, we all know they should never have got that tournament. FIFA have admitted there was corruption behind it. That Qatar should never have the tournament, but they're forging ahead with a tournament that should not exist, should not be happening. And yeah, a country like Australia and New Zealand could definitely host the tournament at that time of year easily. And it would be a great watch. It would be a brilliant tournament. The stadium infrastructure is there. Yes, I think Rugby League or Rugby World or Rugby Union World Cup, absolutely. I think Brentford's new stadium looks very, very nice. It's very well designed, and it's still very close to the old Griffin Park, so the same transport links still apply. It's still on the same bus routes. It's still near the trains, the same railway routes. Yes, well, with the women's Euros and women's football, a lot of people go, it's not very good and all that. You've got to treat it as a different sport. You've got to go into it going, well, the quality level is going to be less, and there's going to be some massive blowout scores. You just got to accept that. It's like what men's football was like in the 70s. But yes, those stadiums, obviously, with the bidding, and you just get my Rizzler and like that. Oh shit! Everywhere. Yeah, with the women's Euros, absolutely. But they obviously have slightly different protocols and criteria to meet, like the World Cup in 2019. They have different criteria. Their capacities can be smaller. They use smaller stadiums, so you get venues that wouldn't make a men's Euros or a men's World Cup sometimes. And obviously, cities have to when the organisers will go, right, let's put bids out to what cities want to have. What cities or towns want to host the event. So you may get the same cities from a men's event, but you may get new towns and locations going, well, we missed out on the men's Euros or the men's World Cup when we hosted or whatever World Cup or tournament which we hosted in whatever year, but it means investment to that location. The women's Euros, no, I've watched a few women's Euros. I've watched a few women's World Cups. I think the worst one was the Canada one because they were using plastic pitches and CFL stadiums, so that wasn't as a decent watch. The protocols behind it are when countries bid for a tournament, doesn't matter if it's rugby league, rugby union, football, cricket, ice hockey with the IIHF, they will have a list of cities and locations they would like to use. And cities and locations also have to bid and put in reasons why they're bidding to want to be a host city within the host nation, or nations if it's a co-host. Then they get shortlisted, and of course, then it ends up with the stadiums you have. Now, the last Women's World Cup was in France, and some of those stadiums and locations have been used for the men's Euros in 2016, and some had actually also been locations in the World Cup in 1998. Also, some of them have been stadiums at the Men's Rugby Union World Cup in 2007. So some cities regularly just keep getting tournament sport. Other cities, it's like Grenoble. Grenoble was the first time that they had tournament football, and the stadium got a massive boost of investment to be rebuilt, partly for that tournament. It also meant that the city, or the location or commune around, got also central government investment. It's the same with the Tour de France in French cycling. Same with the Giro and the Vuelta. Certain locations you'll suddenly notice the roads in the area are suddenly very well surfaced and repaved in the years leading up, because local councils will bid to host sporting events, like the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. You've got, look at Manchester with the Etihad. That was the old Commonwealth Stadium, the Olympic Stadium in London. They will obviously bid to say that we want this investment as well for the local area, but also we want to host. The IIHF with the UK being one of the co-hosts, it's plausible. We could definitely use the infrastructure boost in rinks. I mean, I wish Bracknell Ice Rink was still a thing. But again, my thoughts on recent tournament. We had the joint top scorer in Liam Kirk. I watched a couple of games, but obviously I like my rugby league, and by the time I get in from work, I just want to catch up with rugby league games I've missed. I get sorted and get dinner ready and get my washing done, and I want to get ready for the next day. But it is interesting. Again, it's an international tournament. They had to change the hosting. It was going to be a co-host. They had to drop Belarus. There was political considerations behind that as well. But Latvia has the ice hockey infrastructure, the arena infrastructure to go, yeah, well, we can have it in two cities rather than just the one. Unfortunately, with the UK co-hosting, it would mean Nottingham, possibly Belfast, and Sheffield would be the cities that automatically would get the hosting rights. Because it's normally two cities, so it'd be probably Belfast and Nottingham, or Sheffield and Nottingham. At which point, other cities and towns that have ice arenas would feel that they're lacking investment, and it's the same money going to the same locations. That is the problem with British ice hockey. But it would be nice if we got further investment in the sport. Absolutely, yes. Absolutely agree with that. But again, you want a successful tournament. We've proven with the Rugby Union World Cup and Euro '96 that yes, we can host tournaments. We've got the Rugby League. We've proven the Rugby League World Cup in 2013 as well that we can host a big international tournament. And of course, we've got the Rugby League World Cup this autumn. So obviously, we've proven we can host the Olympics, the Commonwealth Games. It would be nice to see the Euros here again. Will it happen in my lifetime? Will we get a major football tournament here apart from the women's and the men's game? It's possible. It's possible. All depends how next year goes with the women's tournament. If that goes really well, then yes, I can see UEFA or FIFA going, okay, we'll consider a bid from England or the UK. What else needs a new rink? Bracknell needs a new rink. Basingstoke needs a new rink. The Isle of Wight has issues. The West Country, Wales needs more investment. Edinburgh, Fife. Well, anywhere that there's hockey fans or there's a demand, there's a lot of locations in the UK that could use a new ice rink on a permanent basis. But it's the infrastructure, and it's whether the locals are going to continue to use the facility long after the tournament's been and gone. You saw the the frustration in Basingstoke, the Isle of Wight, and Bracknell with rink closures and rink issues, and locals putting in regular petitions and regularly protesting that a facility has been taken away from them or has been badly run. The same in Bristol. There have been outpourings of anger over how badly run and rink closures, facility closures, and same with Romford, with the Raiders, and the length of time it took for their new facility to be built. It's a brilliant facility, by the way. London is an interesting one because around the Greater London area there are ice rinks. There are, but there was rumours of having a KHL team in London at one point, and when the NHL have come over here, they've gone to Belfast. They've gone to the SSE Power Arena, Belfast, because it's the biggest ring. Do I think England can win it? I think anyone can win this Euros. Germany, I think they're overrated. I think they're in a rebuild. Yeah, I think Toronto is Canada and Ontario especially, and Quebec. That's the population centre. Toronto is a massive city in the aspects of the metropolitan area and the metropolitan population of Canada. I think Ontario is like 60% of the population of Canada. Toronto is a big city in North America. It's one of the big metropolitan areas of North America because the Toronto metropolitan area actually carries on into the US across the border. It's a cultural thing as well. I remember Hackney Marshes used to have like 100 pitches. We used to have more football pitches in Hackney Marshes than the whole of Canada. So again, it's a sports thing. It's a sports. 70% of Canadians have played ice hockey. Over here, it's like 2% of Brits. So, if Ireland were in it, would they escape the group? No, not with how they've been playing in the last couple of years. But yeah, that doesn't surprise me with Toronto because you've got AAA midget all the way up to you've got community rinks all the way up to Maple Leaf Gardens, what is now Air Canada Centre, or Scotiabank Arena, I think it is now for sponsorship reasons, but absolutely not. But yeah, Toronto still, the Maple Leafs still can't win a Stanley Cup. You might have all the infrastructure, doesn't mean necessarily you're going to win a tournament or a league, but it does mean you can develop players that may go on to other teams in that league and have success. And Ontario, you look at the amount of players from Toronto or Ontario who are playing in the NHL or the KHL or in Europe and having success in other leagues or other teams. Player development and grassroots is one thing, and that's I think where I would like to see a boost. I mean, with what we're doing at the World Championships and the fact we have a joint top scorer at the World Championships, I think that should. They definitely should get further investment, but it's again the national media. The national media doesn't really cover ice hockey in this country very well, whereas the obsession with football and the way the media and the toxic attitude of the mainstream media, you just have to see it with what happened with Christian Eriksen, and it's a European thing. Do I think Spain could? I thought they were actually very poor last night. Well, Liam Kirk, I think, will probably be traded. His rights will be traded, or he will get time in the AHL affiliate of the Arizona Coyotes this coming season with the Tucson Roadrunners. Free agency's coming up. It's been 3 years since he's been drafted, so whether he's actually signed his entry level contract or not is another thing. He's 7 goals in. It's goal a game he scored, so he's on a point per game average. You look at his totals in the OHL, the Pete repeats. They've had a plethora of NHL talent go through that system from juniors to the senior game. Ben O'Connor has had played in the SHL. He did have a KHL contract for all of 4 minutes. I think, I think then there needs to be look at the funding. We are at the top table in a world competition, and that then, but we haven't qualified for the Olympics, and that's where the funding criteria comes from. If we qualified for the Olympics, then yes, we would get extra funding. It's how the funding formula works, which I think is wrong. But yes, I do think, looking at it, I think Ben Bounds got a contract in the Austrian league. He got injured though. Ben O'Connor's played in the SHL. Liam Kirk's playing over in North America. He also played in the Swedish league system during the lockdown while the OHL couldn't play this last season. So he's been playing regular. I do think, yes, when we get back to normality, I do think we'll see more players coming through that will get more attention and recognition. The more we play at the top level, the more the game will develop. Who do I think gets out of the group? France, Germany, or Portugal? I think Hungary could have a big say in who gets out of that group. I think a big nation could fail, but you still have the four best third-place teams get out of the group. So all three of them could get out of the group, or only two of them. Germany and Portugal, I think, look more vulnerable. Portugal are too reliant on Ronaldo. If Ronaldo has a bad game or gets injured, they've had it. And Germany, their recent performances in World Cup qualifiers haven't been great. They've had some really bad defeats, and Jogi Löw is obviously standing down at the end of this tournament. With how the World Cup went 3 years ago, there are issues with Germany. I think they're in a rebuild phase at the moment. They hadn't replaced some of their key players who've retired from international football. They've got players out of form. And not all the players are obviously playing in Germany. They're playing all over Europe, so they play all different styles. Trying to get them together is becoming a bit more problematic. So it will be interesting to see what happens with Group F. I think it's the group of death, personally. Do I like Southgate as a manager? I think some of his looking at the build-up to the tournament in the last 4 games, I was not sold on how we were playing. The 2 qualifiers and the 2 friendlies. But we got it right in the first game against Croatia. But I'm not still sold on the balance of the team. Do I think hockey should go to the World Cup format of football? They tried it before. The World Championships is every year, and they have the levels as well. It would be nice, but I just don't think the quality depth is there with some nations that would just get blown out 10-0 every game, and that doesn't do anything for player development and team development. And it's also, you've got to remember, it's a winter sport. Hosting it in the height of summer like now, that is a very difficult thing to do with rinks, because they would have to try and keep the ice cool as possible. And then you do have issues with basically a fog forming and the ice surface becoming unplayable. They're already having an argument over the NHL players participating at the Olympics. Not all the best NHL players were available for the World Championships because the time of year it takes place, and clashing with the Stanley Cup. It would be nice, but you wouldn't get all the best players available to play. There are not many GB teams full time. In lots of sports, GB turns back into England outside of Olympic Games. Only ice hockey, basketball, or GB every year. Yeah, it's again to do with governing bodies. Football is divided between 4 home nations. Rugby union, Ireland is a unified nation with North and South. So again, you've got the Lions tour, and then it reverts back to home nations. It's to do with governing bodies and the fact that domestic leagues have branched off. It's an interesting one. Same with Commonwealth Games as well. Basketball and field hockey as well, apart from the Commonwealth Games. So actual field hockey, ice hockey, basketball, yes. And they don't get as much coverage as they should in the media, which is problematic, if I can say so myself. It would be nice to see a GB football team, but it's not going to happen. We do get the Lions, obviously. But it's the way that the domestic federations and the domestic leagues work. Scotland's got its own league structure. Northern Ireland's got its own football league structure. Wales is, ironically, with the best Welsh team playing the English league structure, has their own domestic league structure. And we actually have English teams playing in the Scottish league structure, and Berwick Rangers play in the Scottish league structure. So while people have said, Celtic and Rangers to join the English league system, Yeah, Swansea and Cardiff ain't really setting it alight. I mean, Swansea and Cardiff have won trophies in the English league structure. You've got Wrexham in there as well, and Newport County. But yeah, I mean, GB field hockey, I think will stay GB. I think we do it for the Olympics. So the Commonwealth Games will be split up into England, Wales, Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland obviously appears at the Commonwealth Games as well, and Scotland. But we've got good players in all the home nations when it comes to field hockey. And we've got players from like the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man who actually end up in the GB system. And we do have a very good team, very good team. And it's played, the universities play it, and there is a minor professional league. I think that's the best way to go about it. It means funding for all the four nations is on the funding formula rather than splitting it. But again, we're getting off the Euro 2020 topic a little bit, but we do have a very good hockey team in the UK. A very good Great Britain hockey team. There's no disputing that. We have a very, very good team. But again, we're talking about grassroots funding. We're talking about funding formulas. There's been a lot of debate about that. A lot of debate about funding formulas going forwards. That debate doesn't go away. That's a problem. It's like the women's football team in 2012 at the Olympics had, I think, one Scottish player. The rest were English. The men's football team were all English. There were no other home nations players. I think there might have been a couple of Welsh players involved in the GB team. I think Ryan Giggs was one of them, but it was basically an English team. It's to do with funding, and it's to do with grassroots. It would be nice to see a unified football team at the Olympics every year, but it's to do with the various FAs. I think the Scottish FA proved difficult at the Olympics in 2012 for both men and women. There was no agreement on who should, how do you do that when you've got separate federations at international level outside the Olympics? Rugby union, you can do it because of the Lions. It's been proven you can bring players from Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Republic, and England together. And that has been proven. You can do that every 4 years. So on the rugby sevens side of things, you can have a GB team, and we have predominantly English, but you can get players from the other home nations in there. But it's to do with funding, and it's to do with the rivalries between the various governing bodies at grassroots. And that is the problem. It's the same in rugby league. We went 12 years without a Lions tour. It's basically an England team anyway. Again, grassroots funding, grassroots development. It's an ongoing issue. It's an ongoing issue in both codes of rugby. It's starting to become an issue now in field hockey. But when it comes to ice hockey, we get it right internationally. Domestically, the leagues are badly run, and there are calls to unify the governing body at domestic level in the domestic leagues between England, Scotland, and England and Wales and Scotland, partly to do with the COVID pandemic and how the funding formula worked out. Hence why the Elite League didn't really get going, and when they did, they had a limited number of teams playing a weird cup format. It was to do with the fact that Scotland and Wales had different emergency funding protocols with the UK government and devolved governments. And there was a meeting held about the governing body unifying all the governing bodies under one body so they could get the funding formula, and they didn't agree. Two big members, because all the clubs are represented, held out. And have a guess who they were? Sheffield and Nottingham. Sorry, did I say that out loud? Sheffield and Nottingham, I believe, were the two club members at the board meeting who really dug their heels in and really proved difficult. Um, um, Again, what we think they should be in international competition is different to what the reality is. That because you, especially in rugby, you've got the home unions, and they are constantly in rivalry with each other to do with the World Cup and the Six Nations. And the only time they seem to come together is for the Lions. There is a real issue with the lack of cooperation between the RFU, Scottish Rugby Union, the WRRU, the Welsh Union, the English RFU, and the Scottish Union, and to a certain extent the Irish Union, which covers Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. Um, Working together, they seem to be working against each other quite regularly. The hockey side of things is not as bad, but again, you've got Sport Scotland, Sport England, Sport Wales. Again, Northern Ireland has a different funding formula as well, and it comes down to grassroots funding and arguing about who gets what, um, which is why we see like players like in football, like Declan Rice, switch allegiance, and the Irish FA have been heavily criticised about him switching for England. It's the same with Martin Keown. He could have played for the Republic or Northern Ireland, chose England. So this debate about having unified teams goes back 2 generations, and there's still a debate now. And some nations have missed out on quite. I mean, Gareth Bale, ironically, could have played for England. Same with Sam Warburton, rugby union. Shanklin, ex-Wales centre in rugby union, could have played for England. Yeah, it's to do with politics. The SFA, the FA, the Welsh FA, the FA of Northern Ireland, the FA of Ireland. There's constant ongoing issues that have been ongoing for quite some time, and yeah, there's a lot of internal bickering. Look at the Olympics in 2012. The Scottish FA really caused a lot of problems there with the women's team and the men's team over a unified GB team for the Olympics. This is where I think, while I would like to see a UK bid for a Euros or a World Cup as multiple co-hosts, such as Scotland, England, Wales, for example, or Northern Ireland as well in there as well, the Republic of Northern Ireland, which could unify the nation. It doesn't help when you've got the Scottish FA, the FA and the Welsh FA, and the FA of Northern Ireland, plus the FA of Ireland, which has got links with the Northern Irish FA, all at loggerheads regularly. We do have sport. We do have the Team GB, which deals with the Olympic participation, and then that gets broken down into Sport England, Sport Scotland, Sport Wales, the Irish as well, when it comes to the Commonwealths, and that seems to work quite well. But when it comes to football and rugby union and rugby league, it is an absolute shambles, because they can never come together to meet together to solve problems that the sport is facing, because we've got Welsh clubs playing in the English league system. We've got a couple of English clubs playing in the Scottish league system. And so all the league systems are actually linked. And there is a lack of discussion and dialogue when it comes to common issues that sport is facing in football. And while I would love to see a joint bid, I think the SFA and England and Wales could definitely bid for a World Cup and the Euros, absolutely, because more Welsh clubs play in the English league system than English league clubs play in the Scottish league system, and there's been a long-standing unity with the biggest Welsh clubs with the English league system for a long time, with Swansea and Cardiff especially winning the FA Cup and League Cup in their history. So yeah, I can see an Anglo-Welsh, because we have the same legal system as well, ironically. I can see an Anglo-Welsh joint bid for a tournament, but I can't see a pan UK tournament apart from that. Well, we had the Olympics, obviously, being a feasibility because of the infighting political. Maybe there should be how do you see England and Scotland? I think that's a must-win game for both nations because of this best third-place team format. 4 best place third-place teams. Scotland have to win. England, if they win, they're through. because they beat the Croatians, which I think was a surprise result considering how tournament matches have gone, Nations League notwithstanding. And Croatia and England have got a very good rivalry now. But it's the first time in a long time. I think Euro '96 was the last time that these two met in a tournament, and that was one of the best games I've ever seen. No, I don't think it is strange that Northern Ireland's allowed its own international football team because in other sports, when you're allowed to represent, choose your national representation, so you can boxing, golf, Rory McIlroy, tennis, for example, at the Commonwealths. If they were to have tennis at the Commonwealth, for example, you can say Northern Ireland is my nation. Rugby union is the only one where they have a joint venture with the South. And again, that's political, and I don't want to go into that. Same with rugby league as well. That's where it gets a bit political, and I try and avoid that. And that's a political agreements that the UK and Ireland have made over the last 100 years since partition. So I'm not going to go into that. But they've got their own separate league system, which has been separate since 1921. You have to respect that. They've appeared at major tournaments before as a separate nation. When it comes to rugby league and rugby union, that's where it's united. Otherwise, in other sports, yeah, you can represent Northern Ireland as a separate entity. Has been that way for 100 years. I don't want to go into the politics of it. We've seen with how politics and sport has been a bad mix over the last year and a half, 2 years, that I just want to avoid that conversation. Not because I don't understand the conversation, it's just people, it's just really quite strange. It really isn't, quite frankly. It's just how things are. Because Northern Ireland is separate from the South side. And it is a constitution nation of the UK. It's one of the 4 nations that make up the UK. There you go. Bearing in mind, I think the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man, in theory, could have their own separate international football teams as well, but they choose not to. So there you go. What happens if Scotland leaves the UK with Berwick have to leave? Well, ironically, Liechtenstein, their best team in FC Vaduz, play in the Swiss league system. They're a separate nation. The other clubs in Liechtenstein, ironically, it's a small nation. It's Sunday league football. Vaduz is a professional club. They play in their own separate league system. It's the same with Swansea and Cardiff and Wrexham and Newport playing in the English league system. Wales does have its own separate league system. It's just because, for geographical reasons, Berwick, it's actually more financially viable for them to play in the Scottish league system than play away games because there's no teams near them. I mean, Newcastle's the nearest city, and that's 40 miles away. So it is what it is. Scotland are already out in my mind. The Czech game was a must-win. They bottled hardly like they'll get anything in the next 2. You just don't know that. I think this tournament's wide open. I think the worst game I saw was Sweden-Spain last night. Because of the best third place teams, 4 of them going through out of 6 groups, it makes it a more easy to. Only 8 teams fail to get out the group stage. It makes it a more easy tournament to progress, even if you play badly. I don't think they're dead and buried yet. They showed a lot of good play in that game. Mistakes cost them, and a lack of tournament experience cost them. There's a lot of young players in that team, and they made some errors. But I think Steve Clarke would be actually quite happy with how they were going forward. It's the other way. When errors happen, it's how you get back, and what the goalkeeper, what David Marshall was doing, I have no idea. He went for a wander. But we'll see what happens. They'll be very up the game. If they win that game, or get a result in that game, it changes the whole group dynamic. It really does. The Czechs, I don't think we're expecting to win. They win. Croatia were disappointing. A lot of people were expecting them to win that game. They didn't. But it's like Group F is the group of death. There's 3 good nations in this group, Scotland, and Scotland are a dark horse. And the way they played, they were unfortunate to lose. But this Czech, the keeper, was just like a brick wall, like Olsen last night for Sweden. When you've got a goalkeeper who's just not willing to give up a goal, it's kind of difficult. I mean, and Scotland were more accurate in their shooting than Spain were. Imagine if Spain got every shot on target that they created, they would have scored. I have no doubt on that. There's only so many saves a goalkeeper can make before well, you're reaching Tim Howard levels of elite boss man where you're saving everything. But Scotland have not qualified for a tournament since '98, and every tournament they've qualified for in World Cups and Euros, they've never got out the group stage. That includes back in the '70s and '80s and '90s, they've never got out the group stage. So for them, a successful tournament would be getting to the knockout stages. Getting out the group stage, I think, is crucial for Scotland. But I think Steve Clarke is the right guy to take the team forward. From where the team were when he took over to now, if they qualify for the Qatar World Cup, and with that tournament being expanded again, it's. I think it's unfair to go to Steve Clarke. You're sacked because you haven't quite got it this time. It's their first tournament in 23 years. The last time Scotland were playing at international tournament, Ali McCoist was up front, and I was 8. So in my mind, I think it's unfair to write them off just yet. There's still 2 group games left, and the best third place teams can get out. You can play badly and still get out of the group. That's where Spain, Sweden, and in their group, failing to win, and Slovakia getting that unexpected win against Poland has thrown that group wide open. And a big nation like Spain or Sweden could fail to, and Poland could fail to progress. The Ireland cricket team is a whole of Ireland. But again, very few players from the north actually play cricket. It's like very few people in the north play cricket. It's more rugby union football in Northern Ireland. It's a cultural thing. Favourite to win? I think out of all the matches I've seen so far, I think Italy for me were the most impressive. They even changed their formation slightly throughout the game, and didn't let up in their intensity and their pace. So for me, Italy are my favourites, but I have some dark horses in there as well. Let me just go through my notes quickly. Right, so Italy, on what I've seen so far, bear in mind we've still got 2 games this evening for the first full round of fixtures to be completed. They look very, very good. The Swiss were a little bit disappointing. They should have won that game against Wales, but they didn't. Obviously, the Denmark-Finland game, obviously, you know what happened there with Christian Eriksen, and that then puts a bit of a damper on that group. The Russians didn't perform at all. And, of course, Belgium, that was an emotional performance for a few Belgian players because they played with Christian Eriksen at club level or have played against him at club level. So that was a very emotional performance for like Lukaku and a few others. Belgium looked good as well. The Netherlands going forward look really exciting defensively. Not sold on them. Ukraine, I think, can get out of their group as well because Austria and North Macedonia again was a quite entertaining game. I think that group's really wide open. The Czechs have thrown open the Scotland group massively, really thrown that wide open, all up in the air. But yeah, the Spain group is. I think Spain have let themselves down last night and there are warning signs with Spain. As I said during the match review that I did on the Spain-Sweden game, I've seen this happen to Spain before. Yes, they won the tournament in 2010, the World Cup, but Switzerland did a number on them, which what Sweden were doing. Except the difference between Sweden and Switzerland is when Switzerland beat them with that dirty goal in 2010, their press was effective, as in they pressed as a team, not as a bunch of individuals. If Sweden had actually pressed as a team, doesn't matter how they press, but high energy or passive press, as long as they go up together, they would have actually beaten Spain because Spain were too wasteful. I actually you want to win every game. It makes things much easier for confidence. We obviously did that. Let's finish second in the group in the World Cup. And that didn't work out for us. So I would rather England win out to win every game. We've got to win the Scotland game. You want to beat the Czechs because of the history of England, Croatia, England, Czech Republic in previous tournaments. You want to win every game. That's just how I see it. You want to win every game. Put a number down. Put a performance in. Confidence. Confidence breeds victories. Stop thinking, oh, we want to have an easier route to the final. Stop with that mentality. That mentality has hurt us before. Go for the win. The reason Northern Ireland as a football team is again politics in football, but also Yeah, no, Northern Ireland qualified for tournaments. They've proven it in the World Cups and Euros before. They produced some really quality players. Same with Southern, with the Republic, with 2002. That squad in 2002 was brilliant. Could have gone a lot further in the tournament than they actually did. Very unlucky not to progress to the quarterfinals, I felt, in 2002. Was it considered up to the time Fiji won gold at the Olympics in sevens? No, because the Fijians have always had a good sevens program and a good sevens team. It's how they learn their skills. I'm not surprised. I wasn't surprised at the Olympics back when they won in Brazil. Not at all. I think a single Ireland team would be better than two teams, but it's a political can of worms. I again, you've got loyalists and nationalists and what we've seen um, with sectarianism. James McLean situation, for example, and what happened to Neil Lennon when he was managing Celtic. This is what I mean. Neil Lennon was a Northern Irishman managing Celtic. He had death threats from nationalist sympathisers and some idiots in Scottish football. It's a nasty can of worms best left alone. But Northern Ireland as a footballing nation have overachieved for the size. I mean, they only have like 80 to 90 professional players to choose from and a couple of non-league semi-pros to choose from. So for their player base, for what they can do with the lack of funding they have, is amazing. And what they did in 82, 86 was inspire a next generation of players in the 90s to start playing, and they couldn't quite obviously make the tournaments. Then in 2016 they make it to the Euros, and that changes the whole dynamic, so they can inspire the next generation to go, yeah, I'll do this, because Northern Ireland has produced a large number of athletes over the years, a large number in multiple sports, and yeah, I mean it's a shame that obviously with political situation, it's a bit nasty at the moment. Not as nasty as it was in the 70s and 80s, I will admit that, in the early 90s, but it's still a very tense situation. It's not pleasant, it's not nice, and there's a minority who want to keep the hatred going unnecessarily at the community level. So that's why it's a can of worms best left alone. Agreed, absolutely agreed. No doubt in my mind that is why it is what it is. Rugby union is a slightly different cultural thing as well, but football being a more working class sport where a lot of the political divisions are in the island of Ireland, best leave that can of worms well alone and let the sport do the talking, because that gets quite nasty over there, very nasty. And it's a shame because I've got friends from Northern Ireland, I've got friends from Southern Ireland, and they're lovely people, but there is unfortunately a very small minority on both sides of the political divide who are intent on constantly provoking trouble, which is not what we need right now. But I try and keep the political side of it out of the sport, but it's getting more and more difficult as each week passes with the political hijacking, as I think. I wouldn't necessarily say status quo is the best way to keep things peaceful. You want to have progress, you want to have dialogue, and sometimes the status quo actually allows issues to fester, which is a problem, which is where I think we've seen the taking of the knee and the debate over discrimination in sport and all that rear its ugly head, where now England cricketers are being hammered for stuff they said when they were 16, 17, 18 years old. In Robinson, for example, plays his first test, middle of first test, some arsehole digs up his Twitter feed from when he was 17 and 18 years old and has basically destroyed his career. And there's been a bit of a witch hunt. I think, when you leave the status quo, rather than having dialogue and ongoing discussion of a positive nature, when you start out with positive intent, you get positive results. When you start out with good intentions, you get positive results. And look at the England cricket, the ECB. That's turned into an unnecessary vile distraction. And it does nothing to solve any problems. My bike insurance has turned up. Yes, cool. So I'm still insured on my motorcycle. That's brilliant. Yeah, I've got insurance. I can get to work when I get off holiday. But looking at the status quo, we need to have some tough discussions, but we need have those discussions from a positive base of compromise and going with a positive discussion. And I think what we've seen with England fans, some England fans booing the pre-match gesture, Scotland decided to take a stand, no booing, but they are willing to agree to at Wembley take the knee, and that's where apparently if you disagree with that, you are racist. No, that is a narrow-minded way of looking at it, and yeah, it's a problem. It's a massive problem. Quite frankly, that we're having a lack of dialogue with positive starting point to go into these discussing issues with positivity and openness and compromise. And unfortunately, we're not having that positive dialogue. It's do it our way, or you're against us. So no, there needs to be a breakdown of the situation. But leaving the status quo has led to a festering of problems. It's like Greg Clark when he left the FA. I mean, that video I got a lot of hate for that. No, he left the FA. He was incompetent. He presided over a period where the FA was deemed not fit for purpose, tried to sell Wembley at a loss to a club owner of a club in the country, which is a conflict of interest, mishandled a whole host of things. And then I think when you listen to Crystal Palace and I think Brentford and I think a few other clubs saying we're not doing this anymore, it's becoming toxic. When Wilfried Zaha, who is a black player, saying I'm not doing it anymore, when they're being pressured into silence, that's not the best way to have the discussion. We already have the Kick It Out campaign. We already have the Rainbow Laces campaign. UEFA and FIFA have got their Say No to Racism. They've got their anti-discrimination campaigns where they will have banners around saying, Game for All and all this. All these campaigns that are non-political have been going on for 20 or 30 years. Suddenly it gets politicised. Yes, there are social problems within not just the UK, but you look at France. France has got a lot of problems. You look at Holland; it's not as liberal and nice as you think. Even the Scandinavian countries, especially Sweden, has got the highest gun crime rate in Western Europe and the highest gun death rate, and it's all gang related in a few urban areas. Every nation has social problems. Every nation, and unfortunately, the dialogue is you're either with us or you're the enemy. Rather than going, well, I'm actually on the middle ground here. I do believe we need to do more to tackle discrimination of all kinds in sport. I've seen it on social media with the abuse that the female commentators and pundits are getting. Oh my God. That in itself is a problem. The lack of dialogue, the lack of willingness to have dialogue. When you've got some of the pundits and media saying this has got to be, if you're not with us, you must be a racist. It's like, well, you're not listening. You're clearly not willing. You're saying we're ignorant, thick. Then what is the point of the Kick It Out campaign where a lot of football fans who are showing displeasure with what is happening right now back? Are you telling me that they're champagne socialists and they're pretending on the surface to be for anti-discrimination, but in reality, that is the problem. We're not having a reasonable debate because the media is telling us that if you're against taking the knee, you must be an ignorant cunt. Oops, I said the C word, but that's basically what they're saying. And this is where people are finding it more frustrating and more angry, that this ongoing virtual signaling, which is what it is. Because BLM is a Marxist organisation. So Marxism in itself means none of these players would have the lifestyles they have if their philosophy becomes political reality. Am I against police brutality? Absolutely. Have I seen white people suffer police brutality as well as blacks? Yes. Are we less likely? Yes, it is a thing. Racial profiling is a thing. It should not be, but it is, unfortunately. That is the world we live in. We need to obviously address that. Myself, I've been a victim of illegal police procedure, so I can tell you now that, yes, I understand what it's like to a certain extent, but I don't understand what it's like being racially profiled. I have studied this, however, in college, but I do think in misogyny. Just look at Twitter, look at Facebook, look at the fans of the Alan Brazil sports podcast or whatever it is, or talk sport show. Most of the things I post on there are the ones that are going to cause just the least division. The amount of people banging on about the female presenters and pundits. It's like women aren't allowed to be football fans. It's like women aren't allowed to be commentators and experts. I've never, ever. The vitriol is unbelievable. And I'm thinking to myself, I grew up with Claire Balding and Gabby Logan presenting, and Hazel Irvine presenting Grandstand, and then after Grandstand, obviously went off the air in the early 2000s. Football Focus when they were covering the Olympics, World Cups, Euros. I've grown up with, these female presenters and commentators. For 25 years of my life. It's only in recent times that, social media is the den of, it's just a toxic piece of, it's just the sludge at the bottom of the sea, basically. I want to get off this divisive topic because it is. Misogyny is the problem, though. Yeah, there is. It's not just that; it's just discrimination in general. It is there. It needs to be tackled. But the way the conversation is going, it's either you're with us or you have to be the enemy. I'm an open-minded individual. I think there are better ways of dealing with the problem than the way that they're trying to deal with it. At the same time, there are better ways to deal with either re-education or kicking these assholes out of stadiums and out of forums. Racial profiling. This is the wrong channel for that. Look, regardless of George Floyd's colour of his skin or his background, he had an arrest warrant and he was out of the state and he was wanted. So the fact he's dead and the fact that the way his case was handled was wrong, he would have been incarcerated very quickly anyway. That's my opinion on that. American policing's got its own issues, and American society's got far bigger problems than Europe. Is again having the tough conversations. Again, they're going about it in the wrong way. And unfortunately, I think Europe is heading the same way with a lot of issues. But that's not sport related. So take that to another channel, another forum. That's all I'm going to say on that. He did have an active arrest warrant, and he was wanted. He had fled the state where he had the arrest warrant and was in an area he shouldn't have been. So, but that's down to a whole different kettle of fish, and it's got nothing to do with sport whatsoever. It's just the political side of things have hijacked sport because they know it's one of the few things that we started during the pandemic that they could hijack to get their message across, and it's caused more division than unity. And that's all I'm going to say on that one. And the mainstream media is part of the problem with that. So we'll see if there's any booing and unrest at the England-Scotland game. That will be interesting. There was no unrest at the Scotland game when they stood united. They take the stand against racism. So I think it's time for some of these in the media to actually have the debate reasonably, and they're not willing. There are some on the left and some on the right not willing to have the debate. And then I look on social media and I'm like, there's even people trolling Christian Eriksen right now and making humour out of that. I don't know. This is why I've always tried my hardest to keep the politics and sport on this channel separate. But with Israel Folau, for example, that became quite difficult in rugby league and rugby union in Australia. With Jack de Belin, with his ongoing legal issues that have now been resolved, again, that became quite difficult. With what we're seeing now with the pre-match we'll call it the pre-match stuff again, and what we've seen, Colin Kaepernick as well, JT Scott, the ice hockey. There's been a few. It's getting more and more difficult to separate, and now we're seeing like Olympic boycotts and a whole lot of other the FA and Greg Clark and the Mark Sampson situation back into 2017. I do try my best to just report on the sport. It's getting more and more difficult. Olympic sport already has been politicised for years, going back to the boycott of the US team over the Afghan war in 1980 in Moscow, and the '84 boycott by the Soviets in retaliation at LA '84. So the Olympics has already been closely linked with politics. Like look at Tokyo this Olympics, where the Japanese government has invested a lot of political capital and are becoming more and more unpopular because they're forcing ahead with the Olympic policy, whereas the population are starting to go no. And Japan is not one of those nations where protests happen a lot. They're starting to protest, so it is getting more and more difficult to keep the sport and the politics out of it. It is getting harder and harder. But when you've got parliamentary select inquiries grilling the FA, oh yeah, you can go back to the 36 Olympic Games that were actually originally won by the Weimar government of Germany, but they obviously fell and the Nazis took power and then they really hijacked the Winter and Summer Olympics in 1936. But yeah, no, professional sport at least should be apolitical. Unfortunately, or non-political, should I say? Unfortunately, that's getting more and more difficult, and it's starting to become very, very toxic and more divisive. Sport should unify people, and it's not. And we are seeing a lot more division, and that is a shame, massive shame. But I mean, what can you do? What can you do in this circumstance? It does make things a lot more difficult, but it is what it is, and you know, it's the situation we find ourselves in, and it is unfortunate, but I don't know what else I can really say on that aspect. I mean, the fact that we're having this discussion when actually look at the games we've had played. Look at these games we've had played. And yeah, there are some football clubs that have a political element, like St. Pauli in Hamburg, being a very left-wing based club with a lot of left-wing support. Livorno in Italy, Lazio in Italy, with right-wing connotations. Livorno with left-wing communist support. Yeah, you know, you've got Athletic Bilbao and Barcelona in Spain, where you've got Racing Santander and Espanyol in those same locations, who are on the other side. Atletico Madrid being the working class, whereas Real Madrid being a bit more upper middle class. So there's a class basis. Yeah, absolutely. Rugby Union Rugby League was a political split between rugby, not actually between active politics. It was a lot of the northern teams in Rugby Union. Obviously, the men were also coal miners, steel workers, cotton mill workers. And if they got injured, they couldn't work, which meant they lost a lot of income. So they chose to go professional. Whereas a lot of the Rugby Union teams were based in the South Midlands, where they were more university based. They already had landed gentry. They already had a bit of money. They were lawyers. If they broke their leg, they could still appear in court as a lawyer. They were doctors, so they already had a fair bit of income. That's why that split happened in the 1890s. It's a lot less political than people make it more political than it actually is. It really isn't. It's more social. Southgate is on my look. Southgate is a bit of a yes man. He will do what the FA tell him. He's been involved with the FA since leaving Middlesbrough in high performance department, the youth setup. He is the FA's man. He was. When you sign up to that contract, you sign up to what the FA say. It's the FA that have delved into politics, not Southgate. Southgate is just following what his employers are telling him to do in his contract. Plain and simple. Football lost yesterday as Sweden managed to get a draw against Spain. I don't think necessarily Sweden knew they were going to have to play the high press. They just did it very badly. If Sweden played the press better as a team rather than a bunch of individuals trying to press, because listen to my match review. I said they got their press wrong. If they got their press right, they win that game. Much like Slovakia against Poland, Slovakia played an unorthodox pressing formation and won 2-1. And they won well, and they were the better team. Sweden obviously had a game plan and didn't execute it correctly. Whether the heat had something to do with that, the first 20 minutes they were pressing two banks of four with the two centre forwards, and then it went a bit wrong. But Spain had all that possession, all those opportunities, and could have been 1-0 down at half time, and could have been 1-0 down at the end of play. So Spain themselves were lucky to get a draw because they were too wasteful. Spain only had plan A and Sweden only had plan A. Sweden needed a little bit more pace, and I think also needed to make some changes earlier because some of their players ran themselves into the ground in defence. Defensively, they kept a clean sheet. The fact that they were getting exposed a lot, and Olsen, the goalkeeper, well, he's had a brilliant night. But yeah, Sweden got the implementation of their tactics wrong. If they'd done a Slovakia and actually pressed as a unit aggressively, they would have scored goals because Spain looked defensively a little bit suspect when they were caught on the break. They are lacking a bit of defensive experience there with experienced veteran international players, not club players, international players. It's a different arena, different pressure, different pace of play. The heat and the humidity in Seville had an impact on that game as well. Bear that in mind. If that was being played in Bilbao, where the games were initially meant to be held, I think the humidity and the heat would have been slightly less because the Bay of Biscay having that cooling effect. But I think the Spanish can be, more frustrated with themselves. They missed chance after chance after chance, and that was actually a poor game plan by the Spanish. They needed a plan B. They needed maybe to put that, change it up, change the formation possibly, change the style of play slightly, and they kept trying to play the old ticky-tacky, which has now been proven to be an easy system to defeat if you play like Sweden. And I think the Spain team is not as quality as the Spain team of 2008 to 2012. I don't think that was a football losing yesterday. I think that's Sweden playing a rearguard action not as effectively as they should. If Sweden played the Slovakian style with three up front leading the charge rather than a centre forward with another striker slightly further back, they would have had more success. The fact that Sweden's plan B was let's make some tactical changes like for like rather than actually change the formation slightly, I think that's why Sweden didn't do as well in their press. Listen to my review. I cover that. Yeah, but Greece in 2004 actually scored goals and created chances. Sweden didn't do a lot of that last night. At least with Greece, they would have at least 3 or 4 free kicks, direct or indirect, a game, and a couple of corners. And they had physical height in the box, and they had movement in midfield because they had box-to-box midfielders who would be happy to run and pass and move all day. Whereas Sweden didn't have enough quality or enough pace. There was enough pace in the Greek side back in the day and enough defensive stability where they could actually press higher up the field and have the ability to know that they can track back. Sweden, not so much. But again, that's looking back at a different era of football. The early 2000s, the style of play is completely different now. Completely different now. Spain hadn't developed their ticky-tacky, depressing, antiseptic football, as I call it, because that's what it was last night. When you don't have a plan B and you're going with the blinkers on, you're not. Luis Enrique, Barcelona ticky-tacky, that system has now been proven not to work anymore because the style of play and the pace of play has changed. And the fact that wing-backs are more useful and 4-3-3's high press can defeat that, that's where we went wrong with 2 up front. If they had played the Slovakia way with 3 up front, you then can drop 2, can drop back into midfield to make it a 5 midfield plus a centre forward to make it a 6-man counter attack. That's how you defeat tiki taka. You choke the midfield. You reduce the outball. So yeah, Spain's tactics are 10 years out of date, and they didn't have a plan B. Sorry, that's my opinion on that one. Rugby code. Again, it's not really a Euro conversation, but I think rugby league at club level is better, and union at international level is better because of the organisation. That's it. I prefer league at club level over union. I think union still has that air of I'm a bit elitist about some of their community clubs, saying a little bit elitist, just that little bit. I mean, not all the clubs, but there still seems to be that whiff of, oh, you're a working class man. Why are you here? You should be playing league. Mostly in the Midlands and where the barrier really is the middle ground, which is the Midlands. There seems to be that little bit of elitism. Whereas rugby league, they could do more to expand into the south and southwest. That's again a personal opinion. I think that's where league has gone wrong in recent years. But union, there's still that whiff of elitism about some parts of the country when it comes to players, and I think a lot of it's to do with the media and some clubs and the old boys network. I think there's still that little bit of the lack of working together at community level is a problem, especially when you, let's say, have both clubs or both sports being played in the same location. So the Manchester area, in London, because you have the Broncos and the Scholars, there's that lack of communication and collaboration at community level. Going, look, here's both codes. We're trying our best to work in the community and have cross community projects and cross club community projects to get kids just involved in the sport. At either code, I think they could do a bit more. Yeah, Union does have clubs in the north, but there still seems to be that. Have you noticed Sale and Newcastle university areas? Doncaster is a very vibrant multi-service city, so multi-sector location. You've had engineering, and you need some brain power to do some engineering, and you need the workers to do the building of the engineering product. Doncaster used to be obviously a railway engineering hub. So you've got the working class lads putting the trains together, but you've got the engineers designing the trains. So it's one of them. Yeah, I mean, again, when you've got the boundary lines, as I call it, because the northeast, ironically, is more of a union heartland than league. But football's obviously and cricket are the two dominant sports in the northeast, with Durham, obviously, with the cricket, and Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, and all that, and Hartlepool with the football. There still seems to be that disconnect at community level, grassroots, where I think both codes could come together and work together in the community, because you want to have unions the winter, leagues the summer, and you can get kids and adults playing all year round, and you can share facilities, which means sharing the financial burden and getting the community involved from January through to December. I think there needs to be a bit more collaboration between the two codes, which will, I think, ironically help both codes grow and compete against football, and compete against cricket, compete against ice hockey, compete against individualistic sports. I would actually say the boundary is actually the Midlands. That's where the north-south geographical political line is put from East Anglia down to the Bristol Channel. Where that's the north, that's the south, that's working class. This is more middle class, which is a complete makeup of Westminster, really. But again, that's a political thing as well. But I would say the traditional heartland is the M62 corridor. The obsession with that small strip of land is what's holding rugby league back, and rugby union, it's more the southeast and parts of the southwest, and then they don't do enough. Although they are starting to really get toeholds in the north, and that's where rugby league, with its obsession with not battling back by pushing southwards, is killing itself. But this is why I follow the NRL more. The NRL I find far more a better watch, and a more fun league to feel, in love with. Really, I think they it's the better quality over the Super League. So, but each viewpoint's different on it. But yeah, that's where I feel that's where I feel things stand. Is I think rugby league in Australia is better governed. It's got more money, higher attendances, better TV viewership, better sponsorship, better quality all round. Yeah, I do think the international game is lacking a little bit in rugby league. I think that they could have a unified governing body, global governing body, much like rugby union with World Rugby. I think rugby league needs that. It doesn't have that, which is a big problem in the governance side of the game. But is what it is. Eden Hazard, he hasn't had a good time at Real Madrid. I didn't watch enough of the Belgium Russia game because I watched the rest of the second half of Denmark Finland because of the delayed second half. But he didn't look at the races, but he hasn't really settled at Real Madrid. So whether his fitness, confidence, a bit of both is lacking. But obviously, with the rest of the group stages, I'll be able to watch a little bit more. But it didn't matter because Belgium still won 3-0 and put in a solid performance. With what was going on at the time in Denmark, they still there was obviously a distraction there, but they put in a solid performance. They won the game. So I think that was pretty. They didn't need Eden Hazard to be the man, but I don't think he's been 100% fit since he's been at Real Madrid. I think he's not enjoying his time there, especially, and other than that, it's a difficult one, obviously, but um, what can you do in that context? So it's one of them really in regards to Eden Hazard and situation with Belgium and Real Madrid. But he didn't look 100% no. And that was me watching a limited amount of the game. He wasn't 100%. But again, that's speculation on is he fully fit? Is he in the right mental state? Has he lost a step? Is it that the game is picking up pace too much for him? Because it's been a very, very fast-paced tournament so far. There's not been a lot of slow-paced games. I mean, I know we've had a lot of heat and humidity and travel distances, but he was there in 2018 playing in Russia in the World Cup, and I felt he didn't look quite on the ball 3 years ago. But he's still got the skill. He's obviously lacking that little bit of confidence in himself and that little bit of form, I think. But he's still a world-class player. Not the best player in the world, but he's still a world-class operator, if not one of the top 10, 15 players on his day if he's fully motivated and playing front foot. But again, that's obviously assuming that he's 100% fit and 100% focused. Whether he's obviously got his agent in his ear saying, "We're trying to get you out of Real Madrid," it hasn't worked. Because he's a brilliant player, it just hasn't worked for him at Real Madrid. But a lot of players seem to struggle at Real Madrid. I think that's a cultural thing within that club. So that does affect form, that does affect confidence. Plain and simple. But that's a conversation for a separate video. Calvin Phillips, pretty massive shift. Well, that was a big game. He's young. It's his first major tournament. He's obviously been given more license to get further forward because he plays deeper for his club side. He relished the responsibility of being that bit further forward and having that tactical freedom and midfield roving role that Southgate gave him. But I didn't watch enough of the game to really comment on his performance. I only watched a few highlights, missing the whole first half and half the second half. But I thought he had a good game. His post-match interview was brilliant. He seems a very grounded young individual. He's obviously enjoying uh, playing, which is key. Um, his haircut leaves a lot to be desired. It's a bit of a crazy haircut, but that's the youth of today. He's happy showing his wild side with his haircut. But no, I think I think the way he played against a good Croatian side in that heat and humidity, in those conditions, he played very very well. So I think he will start against Scotland. He's earned that right to start the next game, and that's a big game as well, especially with the rivalry that England and Scotland have, and the fact that you know I think he's earned the right to start. It's all about the recovery now and trying to keep the media pressure off some of these young players. Just be a little bit more mindful that in past tournaments there's been too much media speculation about young players, uh, too much pressure on some of these young players, and you know there is that to bear in mind. Again, Southgate also chose a team for the tactical job. There was, question marks over Luke Shaw not starting the game, but again, Luke Shaw has had injury concerns, and I think Southgate is mindful of managing his workload. Even though he's had a very good season, Luke Shaw has had a lot of time with off on the sidelines at Southampton and Man United with injury over the last few years, and we got a weather warning. Oh, we have a weather warning for thunderstorms from tomorrow afternoon. Yay! So yeah, I think Southgate is very mindful of managing workload as well. Luke Shaw's played a lot of games, played in a European final this season. Chilwell's played in a European final and an FA Cup final this season. Sancho's played in a cup final this season. So managing their workload and getting it tactically right as well is important. They will get their opportunities. There may be one or two changes for the Scotland game, and there will be changes for the Czech game as well. So that has to be bared in mind. I wouldn't say it's questionable because we won the game. I wouldn't say it's questionable at all because we won the game. But saying that, being mindful of managing the workload is important. Absolutely important. So you have to bear that in mind. I think Southgate is looking at his opposition and trying to get it tactically right. And I think those questions were answered because I think he did. But again, that's personal opinion. Bearing in mind, in the friendlies, the City and Man City and Chelsea players were left out of the two friendlies and brought into the squad later on. And he's got to balance the squad and make sure that, unless they're thunderstorm seriously, we have got weather warnings in place from Wednesday, and I live in an area with a lot of tall trees, so I'm actually quite concerned about Wednesday through to Friday. It's been very humid. The humidity is building every day. The temperature's going to be really hot Wednesday in the daytime, so I will be hiding inside my flat. I will not be going outside until it cools down a bit. But yeah, I am mindful that I will have to unplug my laptop, my Wi-Fi internet, which is wireless anyway, which I can plug it into the laptop, my bedside light, my kettle, my microwave, because they could all fry. I'm very mindful of that. But we do have a lightning rod on the building, so I'm not overly concerned. But yes, there is the southeast, especially the south central and southeast, is expected any thunderstorms to pop up anywhere. The humidity is so high right now. At one point, it was 89% the other day. So, was it a good idea to bring Maguire despite his injuries? Same with Henderson. That has been discussed in the media a lot. Henderson got 45 minutes in one of the friendlies. Maguire, the earliest he'll be fit is the Czech game at the earliest. I don't know. I'm obviously not in the coaching setup. Obviously, Maguire will be doing some light training and being assessed because we are basing all our home games at Wembley in the group stage. So St George's Park will be where they'll be assessing stuff. But question marks over Henderson and Maguire being in the squad, considering their fitness concerns have been raised. Ward-Prowse missing out. Obviously, Trent Alexander-Arnold doing his thigh muscle. He'd obviously had a lot of injury concerns this season. Rashford not being 100%, playing injured throughout the season, has been mentioned. So, yes, that is on the table mention-wise, absolutely. That has been raised as a legitimate question, no doubt on that. But it is what it is. Those are legitimate questions. If he plays and gets injured in a key game, I do think how some of the younger players have played in the friendlies has given me cause for hope. Other players like Trippier and Kyle Walker can slot into a centre-back role if they have to. Declan Rice can drop back into a centre-back role as an emergency if he has to. It's not preferred, but again, he has height, he has physicality. But that was Southgate's call and the coaching setup's call. So if it does go wrong, then yes, they will cop a lot of criticism for bringing in a couple of players with injury clouds over them. Absolutely. But they're not the only squad to have that kind of issue. There are other squads where players aren't 100%, carrying little niggles. It's been a condensed season, a long season. These guys have played a lot of football, so that's an ongoing concern. So it is what it is. But Tyrone Mings did play well in the first game, but in some of the friendlies, yeah, there were one or two, moments. But again, it's getting the combinations, getting the confidence with the playing group. I'm still not sold on Pickford as the number one. I'm more sold on Johnston or Henderson being the starting goalkeeper, just for how they've played in the season. And obviously Johnston wants to find a new club. I would have thought, being relegated with West Brom, if he wants to continue his international career. Henderson played very well for United. But it's. I wouldn't be too worried. We won the game. Two sides almost cancel each other out. You're not going to get a hatful of chances in every game. I mean, look at some of these games. I mean, Poland were very ineffectual last night against Slovakia. Czech Republic had a lot less chances than Scotland, although they did force Marshall to a fair few saves. Scotland created more opportunities. What other games? In Turkey were absolutely toothless. Wales didn't create a lot but got a draw. Denmark had all the chances. Finland got up the other end and scored the only goal. Austria and North Macedonia was a very end-to-end game. The Netherlands-Ukraine was wide open. So I look at it, and some games have been end-to-end. Other games have been a bit more of a tactical stalemate, but they've been far more entertaining than in previous tournaments where we've seen some pretty dire 0-0 group stage draws or some really poor performances where it's a turgid affair. So I think the range of conditions that these teams are going to be playing in, the amount of youngsters that are playing in this tournament across all the nations are exciting. And younger players tend to make more errors because they're more exuberant and play with no fear. So we are seeing a lot more open football. And the goals per game is at 2.4 goals per game, which is really high for a tournament. And we've still got two matches to kick off to finish the first round of group stage fixtures, and then we're back to 3 games a day from tomorrow. So it's exceptionally open. I have no idea, like you know, what the end result will be. On an England standpoint, we got the win. We've never won an opening game of the Euros before, and the last couple of Euros tournaments we haven't played well. It was the last World Cup we finally got to the latter stages of the tournament and finished 4th overall. But Euro 2016 we were poor. World Cup 2014 we were poor. Euro 2012, okay, it was Roy Hodgson's first tournament. He had a very short time with the team before the tournament. Yes, we got to the knockout stages, but we weren't great. World Cup 2010 we were misfiring. 2008 we didn't qualify for the Euros, and 2006 was, I think, that window went with that generation of players we had. So we've had a good decade and a half of underperforming, and it was only in the last tournament that we qualified for that we really showed up. So, and even then, we only scored 1 goal outside the box in open play, so we didn't create enough chances in open play. It was good that we scored our first goal in the tournament from open play, and the build-up happened all outside the box. So it's nice to see that. Yeah, it's the first game of the tournament. It's going to be a little bit cagey. Some of these teams have gone out with no fear and just gone out all guns blazing. I mean, the Netherlands-Ukraine game was played at 100 miles an hour for 90 minutes. There was hardly a let-up in play. I mean, the first 10 minutes, the ball went out twice in 10 minutes. There were 2 stoppages in the first 10 minutes. So the pace that the tournament's been played at is really good to see. There's been very, very few, apart from Sweden, and to a certain extent Finland, but Finland is their first major tournament and they won their first game. So for them, that's a win. That's a successful tournament for the Finns. And Macedonia, the way they played, okay, Austria had that little bit more quality in the last 15 minutes, but they could have easily still got a 2-2 draw out of that or a 2-1 win. They went out with a positive mindset. Okay, we're going to play this high press and play counter attack, and we're going to play to our strengths. So I think, what do you think was our biggest missed opportunity to win a tournament? I think Euro 96. We had the team in 96 to do what we did in 66. I think Italia 90 possibly as well, but I think in my lifetime, Euro 96 was the biggest opportunity. Maybe World Cup 98 as well, because of the team we had, which was a carryover from Euro 96. Glenn Hoddle carried on with pretty much the same core of young guys coming through with Beckham and the Neville brothers, and kept some of the older guys like Ince and pulled into midfield. And I think, yeah, Euro 96, World Cup 98. Euro 2004, I would say, just get a cup of tea, my back is a bit sunburned. I would say Euro 2004, we had a good opportunity, and yeah, we did get things wrong. But I think the last 14, 15 years, we stagnated, and missing out in 2008. Said we need to go through a complete rebuild. The rebuild's taken a lot longer than I think people realise. But I think, yeah, Euro 96, I remember that very vividly because we missed out on World Cup 94. And the team had to go through a rebuild phase in 93, 94, 95, and then 96. We suddenly had the class of 92 from Man United were coming through. We had a very strong Blackburn side at the time. Newcastle were quite a strong side as well. And so it was a very competitive Premier League, actually, ironically, during that rebuild phase. Suddenly a lot of players came through at the same time, competing in the Premier League. And there were more English players playing in the Premier League back then. So we were feeling the positivity of the Premier League early years, I would say. Um, and that was a good foundation for the next 5, 6 years. And yeah, you could say 2004 was the culmination of Euro '96. That 8 year spell between Euro '96 and 2004 was that 10 year period we didn't quite fulfil what we should have. Well, I think Euro '96 was a big miss because we failed to qualify for the last World Cup. Um, it meant there was a lot of new faces in the England squad that were not in the squad that missed out on the World Cup 2 years previously. And there was a bit of renewal, and that was a quicker rebuild. This rebuild that this national side's going through is taking a lot longer, but it's starting to show through now. But I would say, much like the World Cup 3 years ago, I wouldn't put as much expectation and pressure on these kids. Let them play. Let them play. And I think Southgate managed the expectation 3 years ago very, very well. And there's still a lot of new, fresh faces in the squad. He's constantly refreshing the squad whilst keeping that core going. The squad's constantly getting refreshed. So that's rather than just keeping an aging core together, there's new players going into the spine of the team constantly. So he's constantly keeping players on their toes. And with the way the style of play is evolving with fast paced, end to end, very open football, I think across the board, I think the overall quality level of football has actually dropped. So that actually makes it more exciting. That's my personal opinion. I think it's a far more open tournament than I've seen for a very long time because teams are actually, ironically, less defensive. Apart from Sweden, and to a certain extent Finland. Finland obviously want to just, catch teams on the counter attack, and they were struggling to get things quite right until Christian Eriksen and what happened there. Sweden, I think, Sweden and Turkey have been the two worst teams so far. So we'll see what happens. We will see what happens. I mean, we won our first game. Spain didn't, for example. There's a lot of pressure on this Spain side to keep performing. Poland were poor. There were some teams that really didn't get the start they wanted. Other teams have surprised us, like the Slovaks, like like Finland, and that's a good thing. Wales were very lucky to get a draw. Scotland can feel frustrated with that result, but they actually played quite well. It's that lack of tournament experience for those Scottish players that showed in that game. Whereas other nations have had one or two veterans who can guide younger players around saying, like, I've been at a tournament before, this is what it's like. It is a tough slog. Scotland are lacking that tournament experience, and it showed. Whereas the other nations, apart from Finland and North Macedonia, have all been regular performers where they've regularly qualified for tournaments. And there are players in that squad who may be new, but there's other players in those squads that have been at tournaments before and know what tournament football's all about. And that's what Scotland are lacking, is those experienced tournament players. That's one of the reasons why I think they lost, that lack of tournament experience. And they made a couple of poor decisions, but they were also a bit unlucky in a couple of the chances. Bišček, the Czech goalkeeper, had a blinder. Why Sevilla are letting him go is obviously a breakdown in the relationship between the player and Sevilla. He's looking for a new club. If he has a blinding performance at the Euros this year, he's got himself a new club. And looking at how he played, we need to really test him. So we could have a tough game against the Czechs. They played very, very well. And Scotland will be frustrated and will be coming out the gate firing in our meeting later this week on Friday. So, it's going to be a very interesting second game. We are going on the back of a win, Scotland are on the back of a loss, and it's a must-win for both sides. So this could be a high-scoring draw. It could be a very tight, cagey affair. I think it will be more open and free and end-to-end because I think both sides want to win. And Scotland always raise their game for England, regardless of how they've been playing before. They always raise their game. Doesn't matter if it's a friendly or a full-blown competition international. When England play Scotland, Scotland always raise their game. And I remember Euro 96, and that Scotland side was a very good Scotland side that we played in the group stage. And yeah, we've got Gaz's goal, obviously, is one of the most memorable tournament goals of all time. But yeah, Scotland always raise their game. They always are up for the fight. And yeah, some of these young England and young Scotland players, this is their first experience in tournament football. They are going to be going hammer and tongs. A lot of them are teammates at club level and rivals at club level. It's going to be a fast-paced, high-energy encounter that will be end to end. I have no doubt. I can't see it being a cagey game. I don't think that suits Scotland or England at all. And you've got to play your players to their strengths and play to your team's strengths. That's why some of these teams, some people go, they've won surprising victories, have played to their strengths and played a game plan and had a bit of a plan B. Where Spain and Sweden, for example, fell down, neither side had a plan B. And Sweden didn't play their plan A very well. Yet they managed to get a draw. And people go, that was a loss for football. Well, actually, it was a victory for Sweden, a moral victory for Sweden, saying, look, we held out a world-class Spanish side that is mainly as good as the Spain side of a decade ago, but basically we blunted Spain, frustrated Spain. Had Spain been more clinical up front, Sweden lose about 6-7-0. But Poland, they were pretty ineffective. And if Sweden played like that against Poland, but play that press better, Lewandowski would be isolated. And Poland played poorly against Slovakia and deserved to lose. And that wasn't the best game I've seen. I think Slovakia strangled Poland very well. But the Austria-North Macedonia and the Netherlands-Ukraine games were so open, it was unreal. I just, that was just constant attack. Defending wasn't a thing. It was a 5-goal thriller. And, it's nice to see that step up, because some club games, when you're watching week to week league football, they can be a bit dire, like mid-season games where it's just like it's a gritty 1-0, but it wasn't a free-flowing game. This is just go out and play, and the heat and the humidity and the changeable conditions playing from all over the continent. Each game has been completely different. Hampden Park, there's a reason why that game kept the pace and intensity, whereas in the Spain-Sweden game at half-time, both sides were absolutely gassed. And yes, I do think some clubs should be looking at the Swedish goalkeeper Olsen. I do think some clubs should be looking at Bischek, because there's two goalkeepers who pulled off a series of miraculous saves and clearly deserve to have a couple of clubs look at them across Europe, not just in the Premier League or La Liga or the Bundesliga or the French League or the Italian, but any club across Europe would go, look, we'll give you a contract. Absolutely, the way they played, brilliant. The Finnish goalkeeper looked a bit shaky, but at times looked very commanding. I think it was a confidence thing. First tournament game, few nerves there. Both the North Macedonian goalkeeper looks pretty good. The Austrian goalkeeper, they won 3-1, looked shaky. I mean, Stecklenburg's 39, so I think his career's retiring after this. But Switzerland's Jan Sommer, he's still going. He's been going forever, it seems. And, there was some very good goalkeeping performances so far. Very good. So, it is what it is. Like, when people ask me what was England's best opportunity, for me it's Euro 96. Notwithstanding 2018, Euro 96 I think was our best opportunity with how we played in that tournament. And then we just came across a very good German side in the semi-final. And that had to go to penalties because we cancelled each other out. So that was two very good sides going at it. 4 years later, we beat Germany 1-0 in the group stage. And both teams go out of the group stage. Euro 2000 was a really poor tournament by both teams. Yet Germany decided to rebuild straight away. We decided to struggle on without changing how our structures at club level work. And while, yes, 2002 in the World Cup, We played quite well until we came across the eventual winners Brazil. And Euro 2004, we had some bright spots in there again, fell short. And then World Cup 2006, we got to the knockout stage and fell short and weren't as fluid. We got less fluid and competent as time went on. And then by the time we get to the World Cup in 2010, we've missed Euro 2008 and we just were poor and we're lucky to get out of the group. And then you go into the Euro 2012, World Cup 2014, Euro 2016. It was we were getting worse. Germany, on the other hand, until 2018 World Cup, they decided to completely rebuild how their structures work, get to the World Cup final 2 years later, host, then they just go on this consecutive, we'll get to semi-finals and finals, and then we win the bloody thing. And Germany have been so consistent since Euro 2000. We have been so inconsistent. And I think the media has a part to play. And the pressure put upon this playing squad, every time it goes a bit wrong, we hammer the players. We have to look at the managerial selections. Yes, Sven got that 5-1 win in Munich. And that was the highlight since 2000 until 2018 was that 5-1 win in the qualifier. And we've had some great players play for us who are brilliant at club level. We've had some brilliant players, and we can't get the formation right. We can't get the team to gel. We can't get the team to flow. And suddenly, we get to a World Cup semi-final. And yeah, it's been a bit hit and miss since then. But there's a lot. The way we played against Croatia, it wasn't the best game in the world, but we were the better side. And Croatia are a very good side. They've always had quality players. But it's getting the team to gel, and they've got so many youngsters who've got no fear, who are given license to push forward. Is brilliant. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the Scotland game because there's a lot of young players on both teams who have just got no fear and haven't had that mental, block in their heads of failing at tournaments before, that mental scarring, so to speak, that has held so many teams, especially England teams, back 20 years. So there you go. Morning, Dan. Enjoying your coverage of the Euros this week. I haven't been able to cover every single game. I had a very, very busy weekend, but yes, I've watched a bit of every single game, most games in full. I've been highly entertained myself. I'm still not sold on the pan-European aspect of the tournament, but I think some people are warming to it. But the fact we've only had one goalless draw and only 2 draws in total, only 2 games have been drawn so far, with only 2 matches to play in the first round of group fixtures, is stunning to me. Normally we have more draws in the group stage. One goalless game, very similar to the World Cup in 2018. But that was for the whole tournament. We've still got a whole tournament to go yet with the rest of the group stage and then obviously the knockout games. An average of 2.4 goals per game, which is only going to go up, I think, with some of the matches and coming forward. And then I think, so 3 goals in the first game, 4 goals in the Austria-Macedonia game, 5 goals in the Dutch-Ukraine game. So some games are having a scoring above average. 3 goals in the Belgium-Russia game. So there's a few games that have gone above average for scoring with Slovakia, Poland. But I think the Spain-Sweden game is the reason why it's 2.4 goals per game. If there was a goal in that game, the average goes even higher. To 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, possibly 3 goals per game if there were goals in last night's game if Spain actually put the ball in the net. But yeah, I've been really entertained. There's only been one really bad game, and that was Spain-Sweden. And that's my personal opinion on that. So we've been very fortunate so far in the quality of goal scoring, the openness, because there's a lot of young players. And I think, generally speaking, when I say the quality, it's just the entertainment quality. The overall quality where mistakes are happening, which is actually fun as the neutral. For me, as a fan of sport, I like mistakes. The pace the games are being played at are increasing the error count, which ironically increases the pace of the game and the openness and the space. And when you've got players who've been basically told, like David Alaba for Austria or Reece James, go out and just play play a roving role and there's mistakes and there's openness and end to end. It's like the Dutch game. They played with no structure. Sweden, if they got their press right, Spain was so wasteful. Sweden had the opportunity, had they got that press correct, to do a smash and grab. The games have been so open apart from that game last night that it's just end to end. And people go, oh, this is why the MLS sucks. It's like the MLS doesn't suck. It's a lower standard, more entertainment, because they're not at the same fitness level, the same quality level. The games are actually far more open and end to end and far more entertaining because you get fun scorelines with high scoring games where both sides are just going hammer and tongs at each other, and defending is less competent. I actually think the quality level is actually less than what it was back in Euro 2000 and World Cup '98. I actually think the games are more open, which is better for the sport. I think for the last 20 or so years, players have been overcoached, which has stifled the attacking play of teams. I think in attack, just let the attack flow. Just let them off the leash. Defensively, you want to coach, obviously, structure. But in attack, just let teams have that roving player or players who just roam around the pitch, create and make things happen because it creates entertainment. And I've been really, really impressed by this tournament. I think also delaying it by a year has meant a lot of these young players have had another season at club level to develop their skills, develop their confidence, get some form. Some players who had injuries this time last year have now got fitness back. And some players have actually retired from the game that would have been playing this time last year. So it's changed the dynamic of the tournament. And it's going to be a very interesting next 3 weeks. In my opinion, the next 3 weeks are going to be highly interesting. But I really appreciate the positive vibes from New York. Thank you very much. And obviously, the Rangers have got Gerard Gallant as their new head coach, which I think is a very good appointment by the New York Rangers, by the way, in the NHL. I will be doing a video on that at some point, possibly, depending on the footing, obviously. But I've also got to catch up with the rugby league because there's some big stories going out with obviously Boyd Coytner's retirement, the Roosters alongside Brett Morris and Jake Friend. That's 3 players in the space of like 6 weeks retiring for the Red Sydney Roosters in the NRL. That's a big loss for them. That's their 3 captains all gone, basically. They're 3 senior players. But yeah, like honestly, the pace that these games are being played at is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. The pace that they're being played at is ridiculous, which is kind of fun because it leads to more mistakes and more fatigue, which is ironically more entertaining than watching turgid tactical stalemates where it's slow-paced, cagey game. I just like teams just being released and are told just to have fun, and you can see players actually enjoying what they're doing as well, which is nice to see and adds to the competition. In my opinion, that's my personal opinion on that. It adds to it. Prediction for the top scorer at this tournament: I go Lukaku. Lukaku's got 2, but Schick has got 2 as well. Who else? I think if the Dutch can keep attacking the way they're attacking, I think Wijnaldum and Weghorst and in fact any of their players could get a hatful. I think the Italians, if one of their players can get on a run, could do something. I think it's too early to say who's going to be the Golden Boot winner. Really too early to tell on that one. Obviously, Lukaku and Schrick are joint top scorers at the moment with 2 goals each, but Schrick could have had a hat-trick yesterday against Scotland. So I think that's too early to predict the top goal scorer in the tournament at this point. Too early. We'll have to see what happens in tonight's games because we know the Hungarians can score. We know Ronaldo, what he can do. He could score all of Portugal's goals and they can still go out the tournament. They did the World Cup 3 years ago. You've obviously got France with Griezmann, who's a former Golden Boot winner at the tournament in 2016 against the Germans. And, well, the Germans are known for having Golden Boot winners, so we'll just see what German centre forward decides to ping him in because they haven't got a Miroslav Klose these days. He's no longer with playing, but the Germans always seem to find a centre forward who can bang 4, 5, 6, 7 goals a tournament in. Going back to the days of Müller, all the way through to Klinsmann, to Rudi Voller, to Klose. They've always had that centre forward who can just pop up and just keep scoring goals. So I think it's too early to predict. But I'm looking forward to the France-Germany game. What a way to end out the first full round of fixtures with France-Germany being the curtain raiser tonight. That's going to be a heated encounter. That's going to be a very fun game, I think. But the Hungarians, we know they can score. Look at their qualifying record. They put a lot of goals in. They scored for fun in qualifying. I know this is a step up because it's the tournament. The best teams to qualify make the tournament. The Hungarians, do not underestimate them. They're playing in Budapest. Home city advantage with fans. And Portugal are too reliant on Ronaldo to carry them. And Pepe in the central defence is the oldest outfield player in the tournament at 38. Ronaldo is getting older as well. They need a bit more support from some of their supporting cast to step up their level. Otherwise, Portugal could have a very short stay and a very painful tournament otherwise. And we'll just see how the Hungarians deal with Ronaldo and how they stifle him, because he didn't have the best season at Juve. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there because I've been going for 3 hours now, and that's a fair live stream. My voice is starting to get a bit crackly. But thank you very much for all your questions. I appreciate all the positive feedback as well. It's been fun covering the tournament so far over the last few days. It really has. I've enjoyed the football I've watched. Been very entertained. And we've only got 2 games today, which is nice. Only have 2 games, which means I can have a little bit more time to relax and do a bit of housework and stuff on my week off. But yeah, it's been fun. No, I want to avoid copyright issues with watch-alongs. I know other channels do it. I prefer to watch myself and then do match reviews. I know other channels do it, but I don't have the capacity to do watch-alongs because my TV is not plugged in. To do a watch-along, I would have to faff around with my laptop and some of the software. I just don't want to do that. I prefer this more simple setup. It's more effective for me, and I enjoy it more because then you guys can obviously watch the game yourself and then give your feedback on how you feel. Obviously, I'm correct or incorrect in my opinions on how the game went. Hence the comment section and the debate that we have. But it's good to see an American fan obviously tuning in. Even though the Copa America has been played in Brazil right now, it's nice to see American fans of the game watching as well. That's a positive. That's really good to see as well. That's fun. And it'll be interesting to see how the Americans feel that we do our European football and how passionate we are. Because obviously the World Cup in Qatar has become a big talking point. Of course, that'll be taking place during what would be our normal European season, which will have to be suspended and altered to suit. And there's a debate over, should people boycott and all that. I mean, it will be interesting what happens with the Qatar World Cup next year. So thank you very much for watching. And obviously I'll have the match reviews of this evening's games. And there might be some other videos coming up on the channel as well to do with some other sport as well later today. So thank you very much for watching. And I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.